in Puerto Rico, a place that its infrastructure, its government and political system is just like here. And so imagine yourselves and your families in a place in which you don't have energy for 5 months. So you're basically like camping, right, in your homes. And it was a very traumatic and dramatic for the people of Puerto Rico. After that, I decided to quit my job at a wonderful organization that I used to work with, Amelia Nuding, she's here, and others from Western Resource Advocates, and work with communities at the front lines of climate change in Colorado, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. Right now, a lot of the work that I'm doing is with Mayor Hancock, with Lincoln Hills Cares, and my own, I call it a Latino-based think tank called El Laboratorio. We're an innovation engine, and one of our, I guess, undeclared missions in a lot of our projects that we're doing right now is to increase the diversity of both ethnically, but also from low-income communities in terms of the pool of workers in the water sector and also in the government. When I used to work for Western Resource Advocates, I did a lot of pretty high policy work for the 7 Colorado River Basin states and helped convene a lot of networks on water conservation. And I was the only person of color, I was the only Latino in my 9 years of work for this resource that provides water to 30 million people, and up to, depending on the data that you use, up to a third of the users and beneficiaries are Latinos. So we have a very acute issue of lack of representation and diversity at all levels of government in terms of water management. This innovation engine is part of educational pathways, environmental careers and educational pathways program that were conducted with CSU and with Lincoln Hills Cares. One of the things that we might be doing as part of this innovation engine, which is particularly anchored in the Globeville, Elyria, Swansea neighborhoods, which according to some metrics is the most polluted zip code in the United States. It's nestled in the middle of 5 Superfund sites. And at the same time, the Natural Western Center, which is considered to be, by many, hopefully, the marquee educational place to talk about water, among other things, in the state of Colorado. One of the things that this grant is going to allow us to do is work with low-income youth and youth of color and community members from these neighborhoods in Denver to and connect them to the citizen science experts at CSU to identify their their priority needs in terms of water quality and access to the South Platte River, and also to develop, based on those needs, a citizen science roadmap for community members. This work we wouldn't be able to do this work without this grant. We were awarded a very competitive Environmental Protection Agency Environmental Justice Grant as cost share to this, and also CSU has committed to provide cost share. If you guys have any questions, we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Jorge, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your passion for your communities and for bringing this project to us. And it's really exciting to have the opportunity to partner with you on this really important work that you're doing. So thank you for being here and for sharing that. Does anyone have any questions for Jorge or for Shane or Ben about this project? Director Schwartz.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question in terms of your collaboration with CSU on programming elements of the grant and of your work with your community, and to what level they're engaging, and also the resources that will be at the National Western Center, and they're deploying those resources to serve that community in their own neighborhood.
Great question, thank you. So we road tested the project already this summer The project has different components. This grant, because of limited funding, is going to cover a couple of the components. One of the components is the Citizen Science Innovation Engine. For that one, if we get a couple more students enrolled, I'm going to be teaching with my colleague Paul Hellman. It's a course for honor students at CSU. That's called Community Engagement and River Restoration. And so we might use some of those honor students to do some of the research work to prep for some of the community engagement workshops. Also, we have funded, or some of the funding for this grant will go towards environmental restoration. That's also a feature of all the projects that we do. It's not only that we create real life problems or learning by doing experiences for our youth, but also we like to leave after the summer a place better than how we found them. And so we have some restoration metrics for that. We might partner CSU for this grant. The Access Center is also going to provide some youth. The Access Center this summer green tracked a federal program that they have for rising high school seniors. It's called Upward Bound program. And in that Upward Bound program, they are planning to both help with the workshops, but also the third component, which is Innovation Engine, Restoration, and a water festival. Upward Bound Green Track program from CSU would also have students co-lead, co-plan, and co-produce River Festival at the National Western Center, I believe in July of 2020 under this grant.
One other thing is that at the Water Festival from last year, these same students who are first generation in their families to go to college decided on a youth advisory council for the South Platte River in the urban corridor. And so we've raised some separate funding to support a youth advisory council that'll be a year-round program for youth, many of whom will recruit from these, both the CSU scholars and the UB17, which is a Department of Education funded program. That connects to a lot of different schools too, not just CSU. It's for higher education and career opportunities.
And just quickly, that's a great example. This year, that Green Track program, Upward Bound, we gave them 2 clients for them to choose what to do in the summer. They choose to help Metro DNA to create a new youth advisory council for the South Platte River, and they published a source book that would actually be the guidelines for the youth advisory council that we're going to be convening based on that solution that they created, that we threw it in a marketplace of foundations among the competitive grant ecosystem, and we actually got $9,000 for our youth for their own, to do their own solution. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share a project, and we would be grateful for any amount of money that we receive from you.
Thank you. Thank you again for making the trip over and for being here. We appreciate it. Okay. Any additional questions? Seeing none, let's continue on to item O. Oh, no,
Oh,
P.
P. This is an application from the National Young Farmers Coalition, who want to put together a Farmers and Ranchers Water Leadership Pilot Program, more of a fellowship. They believe that young farmers and ranchers are underrepresented on many different boards and the Basin Roundtables, and so they would like to recruit, on an application basis, bring in a dozen young farmers and ranchers and teach them through virtual trainings, in-person gatherings, have a mentorship available through them through an existing water leader, and then 6 months later, they would expect that these same farmers and ranchers can put on their own training for their peers in water conservation techniques, and also seek a position on a water decision-making body. Again, tough call on this one. We do see the value of this, but again, limited fundings, we reduced it. So any questions from the board on this grant? There's no one from NYFC here, but again, they're appreciative of the consideration.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions on this agenda item? Director Brown.
I just want to say how much I support this grant. I think that one of the biggest challenges in my basin is getting young people engaged, and especially young people that are busy working a number of jobs in order to also continue in agriculture. So this really stands out to me as something that could really bridge the gap between the participation we're getting now versus the participation we could have after a program like this. And I just want to put forward my support of not fully funding this at their request amount. I know we're not talking about that right at this second, but on the record,
Thank you
that's
for
my
that feedback.
desire.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, we are on to agenda item 8Q.
AQ is an application from the Pooter Heritage Alliance, and so what they do is they facilitate educational outreach programs and related activities, collaborating with residents, private sector, government entities to understand water development, water law, water management. And so what the goal of this project is to interview key water professionals who either have retired or being close to retiring, and get them on record to talk about their careers, talk about the programs they were involved in, their insights, and any information that could help any future water leader, generation, citizen to understand some of these complex issues here in Colorado. And they have in their measurable result getting non-recorded oral histories, and then they're going to make three to 5 minute educational videos for students. They're going to host this online at the Colorado State University Water Resources Archive, as well as their own online video library. And as you can see on the data sheet, they do get 46,000 views per year. 39,000 of those are unique page views, so that was a good, pretty good number for them. Funding at full amount. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this particular grant application.
Thank you, Ben. And is anyone from the Heritage Alliance here?
Not today.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any questions for Ben about this grant application? Okay, seeing none, we can move on to 8R.
8R is a grant application from the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation Education Initiative. And so they create awareness of working landscape and natural resources stewardship in the San Luis Valley. And so this is focusing on the K through 12 students, where they get them out of the classroom and get them out in the field, speaking with farmers and ranchers. There's also multi-day outdoor activities for them, and a summer youth conservation camp, a teen outdoor stewardship camp that's in partnership with Adams State University down there. And as well as other environmental resource workshops, some field trips, and community events throughout their school year. And again, this is just making these students more aware of the issues in their particular region. Review committee has recommended full funding for this, and unfortunately, we don't have anybody from the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation and Education Initiative with us today, but as always, they are very appreciative of the consideration from this board. I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Great. Are there any questions for Ben about this application? I can just speak a little to it that we call it RigWiki. And RigWiki is really the leader in the basin for education. So they represent our PEPO group, and then Bethany Howell is our executive director, and she does an incredible job of getting young kids out. She had some preschool kids out on a farm in a snowstorm a couple weeks ago.
Sounds unsafe.
Those adorable little children enjoyed their time seeing the cows and the chickens and everything, and so she is dedicated. She puts on a conservation camp that actually was that was one of the reasons I got into natural resources, was my attendance at that very camp when I was a kid. And then she has pretty much single-handedly developed an Envirothon program in the San Luis Valley with high school students, and I get to go out to those workshops and talk about water and soil, and it's an incredible organization. So thanks to the board for considering this, because Bethany is making a real difference. All right, we are on to 8S.
8S is, you heard the presentation that Jayla Poppleton made from Water Education Colorado. So again, this is just the implementation of the statewide education action plan as they work to continue to bring people on board and educate them about SWEEP, and then offer them resources and tools, and work with Water Education Network and other groups to just enhance their educational programs they have ongoing. With us today, still in attendance, is Scott Williamson, and we'll bring him up to answer any questions.
Thanks, Scott. Please introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Scott Williamson, the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Water Education Colorado. Jayla's, sorry she can't be here anymore. She's attending Brian Warner, who many of you know from Northern Water. His retirement party is today, so we're really thankful for his role in the education community. And also thank you for the opportunity to put this funding request forward. As you can see, there's a lot of demand out there for education funding, and we're just really thankful for this board, for the water plan grant funding, and the state of Colorado for investing in water education. So thanks.
Great. Are there any questions for Scott or for Ben? Yes, Director Schwartz.
Scott, you've probably heard through the course of these is the opportunity for SWEEP to collaborate, coordinate, utilize other resources, and to enlarge the conversation. So hopefully, looking at the work SWEEP has done in this next step, that this will be as inclusive as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Schwartz, for that. So if you take a look at sort of our SWEEP launch plan as one of our tasks, engaging partners early on is an important part of implementation. So thank you for that.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
All right, I think, Ben, we are ready for staff recommendation, and then we'll have Lauren give. Okay, we're gonna have Lauren first. Lauren, please give us some info.
I will do
The
whatever
funds.
you all tell me to do. Lauren Riss with CWCB staff. So I was asked to come up and just provide a little bit of clarification and a potential path forward. So as far as rearranging funding or releasing additional funding, if you will recall, we have $7 million that was appropriated through the projects bill to the individual categories in this grant program. And so we are limited in our ability to move funding between categories because it was appropriated to those specific categories. However, in the other piece of legislation that we saw last session that appropriated the $8.3 million in general funding towards this program, based on the board's action in May, we allocated $3 million across 4 of those grant categories, and we do have more flexibility with how we allocate the general fund portion of the funding for this grant program. And so we had tried to build in a process for review to reevaluate how we were allocating that funding at the September Finance Committee meeting. And unfortunately, because this is kind of the first time that we're all doing this, having this general fund, additional funding and flexibility, our timeline for reviewing these grants didn't really align with that. And so at the time, upon a cursory review, we did not come to you with a recommendation to release any additional funding. The grant review committees had not met. We had not had an opportunity to really dig into these applications, and especially, Ben, when you have 12 applications that are fairly substantial, that it was just a timing challenge. So I think now that we have had the opportunity to dig in and we have a better understanding of what we're facing, my suggestion, or I guess an option for you all to consider, is to go ahead and move forward today with the staff recommendation as it is, or however you would choose to change that. I don't mean to suggest that that's not an option as well, but and then come back in January, and we can have a separate action item to talk about releasing additional general fund funding for this grant program for this category. And then at that point, we could have applicants that put in this round send in maybe like an amended application form. But we do want to be mindful of the notice requirements and not just ad hoc adding additional action items into this board meeting. But so if we were to do that, then what that would mean is that for the February application round, we have another round where applications are due in February, there would be potentially additional funding available at that point for this grant category for that second grant round. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Lauren. That's very helpful. Are there any questions for Lauren? Director Brown?
So any additional, for the amended application, they would receive the recommendation, whatever passes today, and then they would have to wait through the process, through the February next round application, and then likely wouldn't be contracted for the funding until when?
So the February applications receive final board approval in May. And so then, whatever time contracting takes after that. But I'm afraid to say too much on the microphone, but there may be ways that if they have contracts, that we can just amend their existing contracts.
Thank you.
Director Yon?
I like that path forward, so, because I have a hard time switching things in this meeting and trying to work it out. And I know this was difficult for staff, but I like having some in reserve for other people that will come in later. And if in January we can make those changes, that's fine with me. But we do have these things in certain categories, and we can't just willy-nilly move them around, in my opinion. But is that a right term to use?
Willy-nilly?
Willy-nilly? Anyway, so I like that, and I appreciate the work that the staff does to go through all these and to look at them really carefully. And it's difficult also for me to pick and choose, saying, well, I think this one should have a little bit more and that one shouldn't. And so with all that said, and I know other people may have things to say, but I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we approve staff recommendation on all of these items 8H through S.
It's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Goebel to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 8HS. Is there any discussion of the motion? Director Brown?
I guess I'd just like to say to the folks that are in the audience or listening with the grant application that I, for one, would like to see you come back with amended applications, because I think there are a few in here, including the Lincoln Hills and the Young Farmers, that I'd really like to see fully funded.
Director Hawkins?
I agree with that, Director Brown. I would like to make sure that we have an agenda item put on the January agenda. It's a little bit hard to make decisions based off of one round of funding, but clearly we had a major oversubscription, and this is important work. So let's make sure to have that in January so we can move forward.
Director Schwartz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly would like to really express, again, gratitude for a lot of very thoughtful work. I would, again, encourage those youth programs for the Young Farmers and the Lincoln Hills. I think that we have an opportunity, again, to make this investment. But I will say that I do not support the level of funding for the 10-10-10 project, and would propose a lower funding level. I think that given the impact, outcomes, and deliverables on that, in light of these other projects, that I feel that's quite a bit of funding out of this round. And I would propose a lower number, or I will just stand as someone that will vote not in support of that item if we can vote on them separately.
Okay, so as a point of order, I'm looking at you, Counselor Beatty. We have a motion on the table to approve staff recommendation for all items. So would we need an additional motion to pull item H and have it be considered separately?
You need an amended motion.
If
So-
that's the way,
You need an amended motion.
and then do these board members, you don't have to do anything. Okay, thank you very much.
And
Amen.
then you'll need a second and then a vote. If no second, it'll fail. If a vote, then you're good to go.
Director Schwartz.
May I offer an amended motion that we consider items 8I through S. Is that correct? Or we're doing the agricultural ones as well? Are we just doing the, just engagement and innovation? Okay, okay, thank you. And I through S, and a separate vote on item H.
Director Brown?
I'll second that, but I have discussion on that. Actually, I don't, point of order. Can we do the 10-10-10 first so that if there is additional funding left, we might be able to boost the other applications? I'm just going to try to make this as complicated as possible.
That's right.
Counselor Beatty is nodding.
So you'll need another amended motion.
Okay. So without a second,
She did say.
you did second. Okay,
So I consider
sorry.
that.
Or can we have a second amended motion, or do we have to vote on this amended
We
motion?
have to vote on the amended motion
Okay,
for the amendment.
Friendly amendment.
all right. So, any discussion? Is there any discussion about the amended motion? 2, consider agenda items 8I through S. Director Brody.
So first, thank you. I do appreciate the desire to utilize every dollar available to us now, but I worry a little bit about trying to reallocate dollars on the fly without further consideration, and perhaps a new recommendation from staff about, number one, if those dollars are to be reallocated, which again is not, we haven't yet taken any action on item H, but in the event that there are dollars available, I do worry a little bit about us trying to make a decision on the fly when there are many worthy projects in this round. So my own suggestion would be that we vote on the items that are in front of us today. If there's money available, that could be made available in a future round.
I agree with you, Director Brody, because I see other, I think that the CAWA workshops are incredibly valuable. And so are we putting ourselves in the position here of if we do vote separately and there is a reduction, then, we're splitting it into thirds and fourths based on our favorites. I don't think that's the appropriate way to do it. So I think I agree with your, what I believe is your suggestion to go ahead and vote on them today, but if there was a potential reduction, to let that roll over into a surplus that could be considered with the next round. Director Brown?
Agree, thank you.
Okay, is there any additional discussion of the amended motion to vote on agenda items 8I through S? Director Yuan?
Actually, we're not voting on the amended motion yet. We're voting on whether to amend the motion. So we'll have to take a vote on the amendment, and if it passes, then we'll vote on the motion itself.
I appreciate the parliamentary assistance from all of you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote. All those in favor of amending the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay,
Motion is
so now
amended.
what? Okay, the motion is,
amended.
the
Now
motion
we
is
vote on
amended, and so now we will vote on approving agenda items 8I through S. All right, is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving staff recommendation on agenda items 8I through S, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, that leaves us with staff recommendation on agenda item 8H.
So staff recommendation on 8H would to be recommend up to 72,000 for this project.
Director Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And am I in position to amend the staff recommendation and propose that the project be funded at 20% of the budget request? And that would be $50,000.
I think we need a second before we can have a question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's been moved by Director Schwartz and seconded by Director Brown to approve funding of agenda item 8H at the $50,000 level. Director Trick.
Director Schwartz, if you will indulge me, can you just reiterate your reasoning for reducing this?
Thank you, Director Trick. Again, in light of the scarcity of dollars and our desire to have the greatest impact and deliverables on these different programs of engagement and innovation, I feel that this program, although it has merit, and to be funded at that level of $72,000 is more than I personally am prepared to dedicate out of our total of $425,000. Is that right? $425,000 is approximate budget. And I would be more comfortable with recognizing a funding level of 20%, given the fact that the size of the scope of the project, the number of people engaged, and the deliverables on that project seem to me to have a little less certainty and defined impact, in my opinion.
Director Yon.
Looking back at these, we did fund the Love of Colorado at about a 21%. It was a large ask. And so I suppose that's keeping in line with that. So I could go along with that.
Director Hawkins.
I hear the other board members' perspectives on this. It occurs to me that when we have a project that is not only looking at the water climate nexus, but is the only project in the package that it actually has the innovation and the corporate sector engagement, I do wonder about deviating from the staff recommendation on this one. I think we have a larger conversation in front of us to talk about making sure that we have more funding available, but we are targeting one that has the climate nexus and the private sector engagement, and we are suggesting a deviation from staff recommendation, so just wanted to give that perspective to the board.
Thank you, Director Hawkins. Director Schwartz.
And thank you, and I do appreciate the scope of it, given the individuals who have engaged in that process. I think it's open-ended in terms of the level of jobs and investment it may generate. That gives me a little less comfort with a $72,000 investment in that process, and it's too open-ended on the other side in terms of seeing what the outcome might be. I'd love for the process to take place and then come back, and if there are an opportunity for us to re-engage, I'd be supportive of that if there's a specific deliverable.
Director Brody.
So first, I want to thank the project proponent and staff for your thoughtful proposal and staff for thoughtful consideration. This is a different kind of request than what this board typically funds. I'm familiar with this organization's work in other contexts, and while I agree with Director Schwartz that there's perhaps less certainty in terms of what it will deliver, I think there's also significant opportunity to maybe approach some of these challenges and questions from different perspectives that we don't often hear from in the water sector and water community. So I personally am comfortable with the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Director Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just asking staff of your perspective on the project and the project funding, if a reduction of the approximately $22,000 would mean the project would not be able to proceed, or that it would identify other resources to move forward.
They're already trying to identify. Yeah, they're trying to identify other resources anyway. I know that the reduced amount initially, when we talked a couple weeks ago with Jeffrey, he was, at that point, he was confident they could still move forward at 72 and still get a good product that was worth the investment of $72,000. I would have to have another conversation with him as far as what this would mean to the project overall. I guess I would say, I'm trying to think back on previous rounds. There's been more so on an education level, which is fantastic. That's what the grants are for, and not so much on innovation. So I think this is a good step forward on that innovative side, that we are, as Director Hawkins and Director Brody have mentioned, that we are engaging the private sector and having people that may not know who their water provider is come in and present an idea that does solve some of our problems, water management, water supply, and climate change. So I think looking at that, that's why we went with the partial funding and took the tasks 1 through 6 and added up to 72,000 there. So that's how we looked at it. And again, at that number, Jeffrey was still confident, knowing that he needed to get more resources, but confident he could move it forward. And I'm not, I guess it'd be kind of limiting for him getting these people involved, getting these entrepreneurs, getting these private sector volunteers in to really work on these problems and help us out figuring what we can do and how to solve these issues moving forward.
I think it's also important to recognize a couple things, and I'm reiterating some of what Director Hawkins has said, but this is the only innovation grant that came in with this cycle. And by reducing this, it would not help the other grants at this point in time. We've already said we would be looking at additional funding coming into this as part of our January action. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind, that the $22,000 that may be potentially saved would not be able to be reallocated today, based on what I've heard from the other directors.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. I guess I haven't weighed in. I tend to lean with Director Hawkins and Director Brody that I think this is innovative, especially if it's not like we're freeing up $22,000 that we can then, we've already crossed that bridge, that we're not going to reallocate it. And if we are going to free other funds or discuss freeing other funds from the general fund, that may be kind of an apples and oranges conversation. And so really it is, do we feel like the project has the merits to receive staff recommendation? And so we have a motion on the floor from Director Schwartz, seconded by Director Brown, to fund the project at $50,000. I can either call the vote or we can have an amendment to that motion. All right. All those in favor of approving funding for agenda item 8H at the level of $50,000 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Aye.
Aye.
We may have to raise hands. Who said aye? Who was for it? I think I heard enough. Yeah. But the motion failed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We are left with a staff recommendation on agenda item 8H. Does anyone? Director Yon.
I'll go ahead and move staff recommendation on agenda item H.
Okay. It's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Goebel to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 8H. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for that discussion.
Thank you.
Ben, you are off the hook.
I'm thankful for that.
Great. Okay, we are on to agenda item 8T through V. Chris Sturm.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really happy to be here today talking about the environment and recreational categories. And we have the criteria and considerations in front of you on the slides here. This category is very similar to the Watershed Restoration Program. It's a different grant program, but similar way that we look at the projects. And I would like to say that there are some project examples on the slides. They in no way indicate the priority of importance as far as how they're listed up there. But I'd like to go ahead and jump into the applications. We have 3 applications today, and the first one is the Clear Creek Whitewater Park by Adams County, has submitted it, application item 8T. And this is, sorry to say that we had 2 members from Adams County that were here earlier, but they had to leave for afternoon obligations, so they won't be talking about the project, but I can. And this is a project near the confluence of the South Platte and Clear Creek, not very far from here, where the applicant proposes to remove a 10-foot grade structure that was very integral in protecting a railroad crossing. The railroad crossing has been reconstructed. The grade structure is no longer necessary, and there's an opportunity to do something different at this site that's got a benefit to both environmental and recreational uses. The proposal is to reconstruct into smaller drop structures that can be used as recreational amenities, including tubing and a surfing wave. The Mile High Flood District is involved in this project, so of course we're going to be having a very close look at the flood hazard mitigation potential for this, which is paramount to us in this area. With that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris on agenda item 8T? Okay, please proceed.
Okay, next up is 8U. This is the Colorado Dust on Snow project submitted by the Center for Snow and Avalanche Studies. Please note that this was submitted to the Water Storage, Conservation, and Land Use, Engagement and Innovation, and Environment and Recreation categories. I'm presenting it to you today because I believe I am the de facto short straw in the group. Unfortunately, we're not recommending this project for funding. We think it has incredible merits. It has been funded several times, if not more, through other CWCB programs. But we see this as an operational expense for this entity. And having funded it several times in the past, we did talk to them and let them know in the past that we wouldn't be able to sustain their operational expenses in the long term, and just didn't think that it fit very well with our criteria for water plan grants. So for that reason, not recommending this program for funding. And I can answer any questions about that.
Thank you, Chris. Director Hawkins.
Did you talk to the applicant about what their operational plan would be without this funding?
Director Hawkins, I have not been able to connect with the applicant to talk about that since the recommendation was formally made in the board packet.
And do you see that this is going to be a sort of agency-wide determination that they're no longer eligible for funding, or is it this just that it's not a fit for the water plan implementation funding?
I don't have an opinion on that. I don't control all of the grant programs that we have, so they may be eligible for other grant funding that we have. But I don't think I feel comfortable answering that question for other grant programs.
Director Brown.
I have the similar concerns as Director Hawkins. I appreciate staff's recommendation, but I saw some connections where it would be an environment and recreation. It seems like it would fit in some areas, and I can respect the recommendation going forward, but I think there should be some space to be able to fund this project somewhere in our funding bandwidth. So I guess my suggestion is that we work with the applicant to figure out what program they do fit into, and painlessly try to get them to that place.
Yeah, I agree with you, Director Brown and Director Hawkins. We don't have to tell you, Chris, that the work that these guys are doing is incredibly critical to, I think, the future of understanding snow monitoring in Colorado, but especially in the southern part of the state. And so I know that the Rio Grande Basin Roundtable has provided funds for dust on snow studies in the past, so perhaps the roundtables can get together on this, but I would appreciate it immensely if staff would be willing to get with these guys and see if there are any options, because this work is really important. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm certainly willing to discuss this with my staff peers and come up with some ideas to discuss with the applicant.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to V.
Okay, next on the agenda is the White River Algae Study, and this is 8V. Submitted by the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation Districts. I'd like to thank Callie Hendrickson for being here with us today. Callie, if you wouldn't mind just standing up real quick. If we have any difficult questions that I can't field, we'll certainly ask Callie to come up here and address those. Many of you may know, or possibly you don't, but I'm certainly familiar with it. The White River has a huge algae problem, and it causes environmental problems, as well as problems for agriculture, for diversions especially, and for well pumping. This is a subsequent phase of a 3 or 4 year study led by the USGS to identify the root causes of the algae blooms that happen on the White River. I believe this to be incredibly important work that can help us in other parts of the state, and the applicant has suggested that as well in the application, and it is being recommended for full funding at $90,000.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris? Callie, would you like to address the board? We appreciate that. Thank you for making the trip. Okay, Director Brown.
Thank you, Callie, for making the trip. Really appreciate it. Callie put a lot of time and energy into this, and with that, I would recommend staff's. Oh, wait, are we doing block grant? Yes, so I don't do this right now. I can do all three. I am the clunkiest board member here. I should get a hat to wear. Okay. I move staff recommendations for items 8T through V, please.
It's been moved by Director Brown and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda items 8T through V. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, we are to agenda item 8W. Kevin.
Great. Good afternoon, Board. Kevin Reedy, CWCB staff for the record. This is agenda item 8W through AA, Water Plan Grants, Water Conservation, and Land Use. As you can see, we've got the criteria and considerations up on the screen there. And I like to think this is kind of the flavor, right? So this kind of really focuses on the conservation, land use, and reuse stuff. But we also consider, like everybody else, the stuff from section 9.4 from the water plan for the state-supported projects. A collaboration, is it identified gaps? Does it demonstrate sustainability? Is it fiscally and technically feasible? Plus all these things. These are kind of more the flavors, and this is the structure that I just mentioned there. So got a small but mighty committee that went through these grants. We've got 5 of them up there right now. Let me see if I can advance this. There we go. We've got 5 total applications, but only 4 recommended. I'll get to the non-recommended in 1 second. But we had a total requested of $968,620, and we would like to fund $708,939. So first up, we've got Colorado Springs Utilities, and it's a direct potable reuse demonstration project. This is a really, really innovative one. We've got Deneen Dillo from CSU Utilities right here back in the audience. So when we get done with this, you can have, if you have any questions, you can ask her. And also, Deneen's been involved. I guess Director Mitchell was talking about the reuse, the regulatory stuff we were doing earlier today. Apologies, I missed it by 5 minutes, but Deneen's been really involved with that as well, shaping the regulations for DPR across the state. So this is a really interesting partnership between Colorado Springs Utilities and School of Mines. This is going to be a DPR, direct potable reuse demonstration project. And the twist is that it's going to be a portable one. It's going to be a movable one on a truck bed, basically, in lack of better terms. And the idea is that they want to do education outreach. They want to do some different types of water quality, potable reuse water quality goals on this one. They want to be able to take it around the community, show off the potential of DPR, and kind of culminating next year in the the Water Reuse Association's 2020 Denver Symposium. It's a national symposium on water reuse, and they want to bring that to the symposium to show off and also to make some beverages with it. So all sorts of beverages, non-alcoholic and alcoholic, I think, to boot. So much like Denver Water did for their 100th anniversary with the first demonstration project. So anyway, this is just kind of building off of current projects like the regulatory framework that we're going through, really kind of getting the word out. And the good thing about this is at the end of the day, School of Mines is collaborating on this whole thing to build it with students and professors to build the thing and try different treatment trains, but also to take that back to School of Mines. School of Mines is going to take that back to their campus and be able to use it for other utilities and other towns that want to take advantage of that. And I heard that Castle Rock is very interested in using this right after Colorado Springs is done too. So this is a good demonstration project, furthering the idea of direct potable reuse in the state, and also with a big strong partner from School of Mines to take it on and further it for whoever wants it across the state after that. So I think I'll leave it at that. And if you have any questions for Deneen, she's here. Or if you want to move on, we can move on.
Thank you, Kevin. Are there any questions for Kevin or for Deneen? Deneen, would you like to address the board? No, Kevin did it justice. So great. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to item X.
Okay, great. This is and this is the one that unfortunately we're not going to recommend. This is the new irrigation system construction for Cottonwood Metro District. Of all the criteria and considerations I had went through, it just didn't quite rise to the level that we wanted to for innovation, for collaboration. Had trouble getting measurable results out of this, and it really kind of ended up being putting new pipes in the ground for an old system. So we kind of thought that it really didn't quite fit this. If there was another twist to it or more to it, we would have considered it more, but I think I'll leave it at that. It was really just replacing an old aging infrastructure that I think that they were going to do anyway. So it really didn't really rise them to expend the resources for this. So with that, I'll ask for any questions.
Are there any questions for Kevin? Okay, please keep going.
Great. All right. So this next one is system and process for assessing water use of land use decisions, and this is from the One Water Solutions at Colorado State University. Some of you might remember this grant. This is kind of a revisiting of this grant. Unfortunately, it's a sad story. The original grant applicant had passed away in June, so it was just starting to go up and running, and so it kind of sat dormant. We closed out the grant, and then his old professor from CSU came back and said, "Hey, the applicants, the participants from the 4 water utilities, the 4 water providers, really want this to go, and I think we want to bring it back around." So, working straight with Colorado State University now, they kind of brought it back and reconfigured it a little bit. We've got El Paso County, Elko Water coming in for that, Northern Weld County, Fort Collins Loveland Water District, and the City of Westminster. And basically what this is going to do is create a kind of a digital and software interface where they're using a model from CSU, the Integrated Urban Water Demand Model, looking at parcel data, but they're using this to enter that into land use kind of designations, land use types. And you could refer to that as zoning. And really kind of putting a quantified number on these zoning types and saying, what should the demand be for this type of water, this land use type? It hasn't really been done. Westminster has ventured into this a little bit. They've been doing it somewhat, but it's more like on averages. This is going to get much more deeper into this. Plus, it's creating a communication link between land use planners and the water planners in the site. So for Westminster, they're within the same municipality, so it's a little maybe easier for them to do this. They're communicating already, but they want to up their game and do a better job of predicting demand based on land use patterns. But for these special districts like Elko or Fort Collins Water Loveland or Northern Weld County, they don't have land use authority, so they're kind of stuck between different municipalities and counties. So the idea is to create this kind of communication link in the development process between water and land use planners. And one example I can say right now that we've been using is Eagle County, where Eagle River and Water Sanitation District okays a development, goes forth. The developer changes things over time, and pretty soon the demand is about 20% more. Well, they don't have to go back to the water district to change that. So then the water district says, hey, why do we have this 20% more demand here? So this is one of those situations that this kind of tool will help kind of alleviate that. The idea is that then they can, they'll have a kind of a subscription service, but also a free service for people who want to do it themselves. So, and they're going to support the water providers after they get done with this. So, so just so you know that we've approved this once before, but it's a different setup now. It's CSU, and I'm not sure, somebody from CSU was supposed to be here, but I don't think they made it. So I can probably answer most of these questions for you if you have them.
Kevin, thank you for that very detailed description. It was very helpful.
So,
Director Schwartz.
And thank you. I think it's an excellent tool. Are you finding ways that you can assist in, let's say, counties that haven't put together a land use plan, that maybe when it's, as opposed to taking existing designation for zoning, what about working with communities that are developing new zoning regs and designations?
So you're thinking of counties that may not have zoning right now. That's a good point. Hadn't thought that through there. The partners right now, they're working with existing zoning, but that would be a really good addition to this, to say, hey, if you're going to do this, you need to do this because you can't do it without the zoning regulations. So I think that's a really good added bonus I could bring back to the applicant and see what they think about that.
Thank you. Offering it as a tool.
Great. Thanks for that feedback. Any additional questions? Carry on, Kevin.
Okay, keep going. The next one is a sustainable water solution. This is from Uponor, Finn, and Grader, 3 companies and 3 products. Basically, this is a really interesting one. This is being brought forth in Denver Water Service area, and there's 40 houses that they're going to put these things in, and really what it's a combination of is an advanced leak detection system inside the house, logical plumbing that shortens the hot water returns and the runs, so you get a more efficient use of the distribution of water. And number 3, a full-on gray water system. Denver has passed an ordinance where they can allow this in the city and county of Denver, and Greater is the gray water portion of this, and they are NSF 350 certified, which you have to be in the state of Colorado to do this. They've got a really good plan where they're working with Lennar Homes, and Lennar said, yeah, they've kicked in money, and they're going to put it in 40 homes. They're going to study it for at least the water consumption for a year from the time it goes in. But the idea is that Greater also has a training program for plumbers that are working for Lennar to do this. They're going to train them how to install this stuff. Plus, they're going to train maintenance professionals after the fact. They state that homeowners can pretty much easily do the maintenance yearly, but they're going to train up people to help them do the maintenance as well. So it's kind of a turnkey operation. Hopefully, we haven't had a large-scale version of this yet in the state, so this will be interesting to see how this goes. I think it's going to be really successful. And also the leak, I forgot to mention the leak detection portion of it is really tied in with the homeowner. It basically learns the patterns like a Nest thermostat does. And so it'll alert the homeowner when there's an aberration in water use. So if there's a catastrophic leak, there's a valve that'll shut off everything. It'll also let them know that, hey, something's not quite right in your house. You're using more water. So it'll be interesting to see how these 3 things work. I think it's a really good combination.
Great. Director Schwartz.
Thank you. Quick question. I was a little unclear as to the cost of the units per home. It looked like it was $1,000 50 cost, but then a subsidy of $3,500. I mean,
Yeah.
So what's sort of the real cost of this when you look at a 25% savings? How many dollars per, say, gallon of water? I mean, is this going to be economically feasible when you scale it up?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they say full cost, no subsidies, anything like that, right? So like $4,500 a unit, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah, like with a lot of things, water is cheap in Colorado, so the payback does take a while. If you're saving 20 to 25,000 gallons a year on that, that could be a number of years. I can't do the math on the top of my head, but it could be. But I think they're saving, I should have brought that sheet with me. They said it's about 2.7 acre feet per year for these 40 homes. And that's basically the first year. After that, then it continues. So then the payback continues. So, if you think about that, if it's 4,000, by 40, it could come out to be, I don't know, maybe 30,000 acre foot. If you have a calculator going, you can do that. But so it's in the beginning, sure, it's going to be a little expensive, but I think as they install more, it's going to be more cost effective as you do larger swaths of the subdivision. Because as a home builder, I would imagine that they want to probably offer saying, hey, here's the high green option, and here's your standard home. And so we're gonna subsidize some of this, but it's going to cost you a couple more $1,000 in the life of a mortgage. I think people would go for that. I think so.
Great. Director Brody.
So I'm excited to see this one come forward. When I was at the city attorney's office, I worked on the regulations for Denver to allow these types of systems in Denver, and Denver also pushed hard at the state level for the state to adopt rules that would authorize use of gray water across the state. Unfortunately, despite the fact that we've had this ability in Denver and across the state for a few years now, there was a news article a few months ago that basically said no one's actually doing it, which to me is really sad that there was a lot of good intent and a lot of good thought that went into the rules, but it is hard just on a cost basis to make these systems attractive. So I'm pleased to see private sector stepping forward and coming with solutions to hopefully make this more feasible, more cost effective, and happy to support this project. Thanks.
Yep. And to add too, they were looking at Castle Rock and Thornton as well, and I think they're this close to passing ordinances themselves, so they were looking at them, but they weren't quite ready. So they said, we're just going to back down and just do Denver right now. But I think they're going to be around. They're going to work with those other municipalities. So I think we're going to see some movement, especially a large scale like this. This is a pretty good demonstration. I think you're going to see a lot more movement after something like this goes through.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Keep going, Kevin.
Okay.
Home stretch.
I think one more. All right, great. This is the Integrated Water and Land Use Planning Colorado Communities Direct Community Assistance, Western Resource Advocates, and Water Now Alliance. Amelia Newting is in the audience, so we can bring her up for questions if you have any after this. So this is Amelia, WRA has been working with us a lot on this land use water nexus. They've been participating in a lot of these Sonoran Institute trainings I've been talking about, a lot of these guidance documents and a lot of these trainings. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to kind of fill this niche and go to the next level of saying, we've done some trainings, now people are ready to do these things, but they might not be ready to do these things on their own. So they're going to be working with, they're going to identify a number of communities along the Front Range right now, and they're focusing on that right now because that's where the population is, but they're really open to expanding this to other parts of the state. But really looking at what these communities' needs are and how do they implement this stuff? How do they get it on the ground? It's great that they can go to a training, but if they're not going to implement this stuff after the fact, then that kind of leaves us hanging a little bit. So the idea is they want to identify 10 to 15 communities and then really work 5 to 10 communities and really look at their policies and their strategies, integrate these things into their codes, into their zoning, things like that, and then and really kind of come back out and do some workshops on what they found from this idea, and really synthesize these lessons learned so that people can learn from them down the road. So I will leave it at that, and if you have any questions for Amelia, we can have her come up and answer any.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Are there any questions for Kevin or for Amelia? Amelia, do you have anything you'd like to add to the board? Okay. Well, thank you for being here. All right. Okay, I think we're ready for staff recommendation.
Great. Staff recommends the board approve the project's activities marked as approved and listed in the following table for the water plan grant funding.
All right, we have staff recommendation. Director Brody?
Thank you. I will move approval of, items 8W through AA.
Second.
Great, it's been moved by Director Brody and seconded by Director Schwartz to approve staff recommendation on agenda items 8W through AA. Is there any discussion? Director Brown? No.
Third. Get the thought.
Okay, it's been double seconded and there's no discussion. We're going to proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, Anna, welcome.
Thank you. Anna Moss, CWCB staff, for the record. So I'm going to present agenda item 8BB through EE. It's the home stretch of water plan grants, so I will try to be brief. So criteria and guidelines on this, the lens through which the committee really views these is, are we moving the needle on attaining that 400,000 of acre feet of storage by 2050 as outlined in the water plan? And then also we're looking at reducing the projected M&I gap to 0 by 2030. So that's the really big lens that we look at. And then same things as everyone else has mentioned. Is it regional? Is it multi-beneficial? Is it in a basin implementation plan? If there's construction associated, did they do some feasibility work with that? Is it technically feasible? And then really it's that how many acre feet are gained. And so is it new storage and new supply? Those are the two key critical factors. So for this round, we received 4 applications and only 3 are actually being recommended for approval at this time. We did not request any applicants attend for these, so I don't have anyone here in the audience. So for BB, it was an application from Laramie Energy, and it was a reservoir rehabilitation project. It was purely to rehab an existing dam. It didn't create any new storage, so for that reason, it just didn't align with the goals of this program. I spoke with the applicant early in the process and let them know that it wasn't going to be a good fit, and so I informed them about the loan program, which always works for reservoir rehab, and then also the roundtable funding, and say we're going to look at other funding options. So that one is not being recommended, and I'll pause there if there are any questions.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for working with them to steer them to an appropriate source of funds. We appreciate it. Any questions for Anna? All right, great.
Okay, onward to CC. This was an application from Redlands Water and Power Company, and this again was just a pure infrastructure replacement. It was for a pump line replacement, didn't align with the goals of this category, it didn't address any supply gap or storage gap. That said, I've worked heavily with the applicant. We thought we might have a revised scope ready for you today. They're not quite there. I'm going to continue to work with them. It's likely that they're going to refine some sort of project that would better align with the overall goals of the water plan. Maybe this bucket, maybe a different one, we're not sure. So I continue to work with them, but at this moment in time, we're not recommending funding for this.
All right, are there any questions for Anna about CC? Okay, please proceed.
Okay, so DD, this one actually is getting recommended, so I'm thrilled to share this one with you. This is for the town of Erie. It's a horizontal well pilot project. We're recommending $200,000 for this. They want to drill a horizontal well that will collect Windy Gap effluent that they will then put into their augmentation plan. Some of the benefits of this are that it'll get riverbank filtration, so I think it's going to have a water quality component, and they expect it to have higher yield than a traditional well. This one does meet a measurable objective of adding about 2,000 acre-feet of supply into their system, so they're hopeful that this would also reduce need for future buy and dry. And they actually initially applied to the engagement and innovation category that Ben was way oversubscribed. And when we looked at this, we said, well, it actually does fit the supply category too, but part of their plan is to do workshops and share their information with other municipalities and really make sure that they can demonstrate best practices to others and share that information. So that's why they initially went to that particular category. So it's a $1.8 million project. They are putting in cash of $1.6 million. So the grant's for just over 10% of that project cost. So with that, I'll take questions.
And Anna, is the applicant here?
No.
Okay, thank you for confirming that.
Sure.
Director Yon.
Yeah, I was just curious on this. I like this idea. Do you know, maybe this is a question for Director Ryan, who's studious over there, but is there any delayed depletions associated with a horizontal drill, or is this considered a direct diversion from the river?
I believe it's considered a direct diversion, but I will look to Director Ryan as being far more intelligent than myself.
Hello. And I've been reviewing this. I do see, Director Yon, that there is mention in the write-up of an augmentation plan and a substitute water supply plan. So I'm only inferring from that people that really know the way the South Platte works will include any delayed impacts. As a horizontal well, it very well could underlie the alluvium and have pretty short lag times, but need to be recognized nonetheless. So that's what I'm assuming, and since it will be our group that gets to review that, we'll be very careful about that.
Any additional questions for Anna? All right.
Okay, onward to the last one. Agenda item EE was a application from Waterhorse Resources. This was for the Flaming Gorge pre-permitting and permitting project. I would imagine that a lot of you in this room are familiar with this concept. Waterhorse Resources applied for water rights on the Green River system to develop a new supply that would bring water from Utah through a pipeline across Wyoming and then down the Front Range. It's a $1.7 million project to do a lot of feasibility work. The long story short is we're not recommending funding at this time. The scope was just so large, it was really hard to get our hands around what all they were going to do, and there wasn't enough detail in the budget that I felt like I could really parse out what would be a reasonable component for us to fund. It also really just felt really speculative at this moment in time. And then there's the complication of the water rights. They haven't been secured. There's the interstate complication tied to that. And then lastly, this was an application from a private development company, not an end Colorado water user or water provider. And so that gave us a little bit of heartburn too. So that's generally why we are not recommending funding for this project at this moment in time.
Thank you, Anna. And when I read through it, I was struck by, I didn't see any mention of utilizing any of the, the water plan guidance for a new Trans Mountain diversion and the the framework developed by IBCC. And so I think that would be some helpful feedback to them too, that if they intend to come back to us, that I would hope they would do that groundwork of, all the steps that we've laid out in Colorado's water plan before we would be interested in supporting something like this. Are there any additional comments? Director Hawkins.
I know that I have asked the question on prior applications about the private entity with funding. Usually my question is the other way. I guess my comment today is I would like us to have some consistency on how we treat that issue, so that there's fairness across the board. If there's something in particular here that has been different than other private applicants, I'd be interested in knowing that. But my comment is just let's try to be consistent about that frame of viewing projects.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, and in this case, it was a little bit unique in that I think it just had a lot more of a speculative feel to it, in addition to being more of a pure development side. But yeah, I agree.
Okay. Anna, let's have your recommendation.
Okay, so you've got the recommendation is that the board approve the projects and activities listed in the table for water plan grant funding.
Director Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that approval of items 8BB and 2EE per staff recommendation of water storage and supply projects.
It's been moved by Director Schwartz and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda items 8BB through EE. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're at lunch. Second lunch. Okay, agenda item 9. Earlier when Kevin Reedy was talking about having a big, strong partner, I said, who gets to work with Kirk Russell? We do.
Madam Chair, Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. You were asking for what we're thankful for. I'm thankful I'm not Ben Wade today. Okay, our task here is to get us back on schedule. This is a no action item, and it's the paperwork that I handed out. One of them stapled together, and then the other one will be we'll maybe use that later in the water project, or I'm sorry, the projects bill discussion. So before I get started, quick introduction. Lauren Miramont is here. Lauren, wave. Lauren is our accountant in the loan program, and if you'll notice, we're doing things a little bit different this year. In the past, Lauren has presented the financial statements to the board as a separate item, and she didn't get a lot of questions last time, so she said, I don't think they really need to hear me talk about this. And I said, well, we'll put it in this agenda item, and if they have questions, be here to answer. And so she's available if there is any comments on those financial statements that are prepared for last fiscal year. And we can deal with that at the end of this presentation. So in general, there's not a lot of surprises in our current status. We're 4 or 5 months into the fiscal year. Everything seems to be moving correctly. I'll start with the construction fund. The projections for federal mineral lease went up $1 million. Not a big change, but it is interesting that it went up. We do have a considerable amount of money yet available to loan in the construction fund. I'm showing that we've got as much as $30 million yet available. At the bottom of that table, you can see we're starting to project what the impact to a projects bill that will be discussed later in the day, the impact to the funds. So I prepare that as if it were to be approved, but certainly that could be modified through the action later on today. So with that, I'm going to shift to the severance tax sheet. Under the projections for cash from severance tax revenues, that has gone up about 30% since the June projection. So that's good news for certainly the loan program, but also for the Tier 2 grant program that WSRF is involved with. Like I said, we're about 3 months in on the distribution of severance tax, and we're on track for that. A big number that looks unique is the loan deauthorization / reversals in severance tax, and that is also connected to another presentation later on in the day. The authorization that the legislature provided this board for the Arkansas Valley conduit expired at the beginning of this fiscal year, so we've rolled that back into the fund, and that's why that $48 million, actually about $42 million of that is that Arkansas Valley conduit reversal back into our fund and available for use in loans. So then looking down, you can see there's still a considerable amount of money, even after a potential approval of the Ark Valley conduit loan which is part of that 208 to be recommended today. To date, we've made about $40 million in loans in this fiscal year already, if we include this November board meeting. And so things are happening on the loan side, which is a good thing, but as you can see, there's still a considerable amount of money available. And then if we roll in a designation of money for the Ark Valley conduit of that $90 million that we'll talk about later, there's still, again, considerable amount of money available for loans. With that, I think I will take any questions, and then we'll bring up the loans. Actually, I think Anna's got an agenda item next as well.
Does anybody have any questions for Kirk on this item? Seeing none, let's move on to agenda item 9B.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Anna Moss, CWCB staff, again for the record. Agenda item 9B is the new policy on distribution of grant funds. I will be brief on this, in part to help catch us up a little bit, but also because we discussed this at the Finance Committee in September. So a quick reminder of this is the background, I guess, is probably a little bit important, the need for this. Right now, we are managing more grants than we ever have in the history of the programs, any programs here. We also have a lot of project managers working on a number of different grants. And so we thought it was important to have a consistent policy to guide not only the project managers, but also set an expectation for grant applicants so they understand how we generally disperse funds. And it was important to us in part because of the matching requirements, especially now that that 50% match for the water plan is in statute. We need to make sure we're tracking that and applying that. And so the policy is effectively that we'll disperse grant funds as a percentage of the total project cost as invoices come in. And where this, an example, I guess, where this could have been a problem was if someone thought their project was going to cost $1 million, and for some unforeseen reason, it actually came in at $800,000, and everyone's thrilled, but the state paid $500,000. Now we've paid more than that 50%, and so we just wanted a way to really monitor that match. And there is some language in there that there is some PM discretion. If a project manager feels like, sometimes we define a very specific task that we're going to pay for to an overall project, there might be some cases where there's some discretion, so we still have that ability, but this is general guidance for staff to use as they manage projects. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions for Anna? Anna, do you have a staff recommendation on this item?
So staff recommendation is that the board approve policy 23, which is titled Disbursement of CWCB Grant Funds as a Percentage of the Total Project Cost.
Director Brown?
I'd like to move staff's approval recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve staff recommendation on agenda 9B by Director Brown, a second by Director Schwartz. I don't know if I should take the vote or not.
Thanks for holding down the fort. Director Hawkins, is there any discussion on the motion? Yes, Director Yon.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for going through this. I thought this was the way that it was done, because a lot of the ones that I dealt with were done this way. So, and it just makes sense that you should do it this way. So I would just want to thank you for clarifying this across the board.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very well written. It's very clear, and it's good direction going forward. So thank you for doing this. Okay, any additional discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are on agenda item 10, water project loans. 10A is the Republican River Conservation District. Rachel.
Hi there, Rachel Pittenger, CWCB staff, and I would like to answer your question about Thanksgiving. And I guess there are numerous things to be thankful for that I have to be thankful for this year. But I think at the top of my list, this one will be family. So, I'm also going to be addressing agenda item 10A, which is the surface water rights purchase for the Republican River Water Conservation District. Okay, the project site is located in the Republican River Basin, which is in the eastern portion of the South Platte Division 1. The loan amount requested is for $5,570,150 for a 20-year reduced interest rate of 1.20%. I've been working with Mr. Rod Lenz, the president of the district, as well as Ms. Deb Daniel, who's general manager. She's also with the district. And I'd like to acknowledge Mr. David Robbins with Hill and Robbins. He's here representing the district as well. So the basin itself, you'll see in the schematic, is the black hatched portion there. The blue, the basin itself overlies the regional underground aquifer system. So the blue is the aquifer system. So it's the High Plains Aquifer or Ogallala Aquifer. And off to this side is a little bit more of a zoomed in picture of that basin. You'll see from that map that the basin itself is in 3 states, Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas. So before I go any further, I just want to give a few highlights of the Republican River Basin Compact because it's foundational for the district. So if you bear with me, there's a lot of words on here. I'll try to be as brief as I can. As a result of the flood in 1935, and in an effort to acquire federal funds to provide flood control and protection, the Republican River Basin Compact was signed, negotiated, approved by Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska on December 31st, 1942. So come 1998, Kansas and Nebraska, Kansas sued Nebraska, contesting that Kansas was not receiving all the water awarded to Kansas from the 1942 agreement compact. So Nebraska argued they were not receiving their share of the water from Colorado, and so that's how Colorado got brought in to the case. This legal action was filed in the federal Supreme Court. States negotiated and finally agreed to the obligations of the settlement stipulation. So if you hear those words, this is kind of how things connect on a very high level here. The states all agreed, and claims against each other relating to the compact occurring before December 15, 2012 would be waived and dismissed. The final settlement stipulation was signed December 15th, 2012. So now a little bit more about the borrower, the district. What you'll see here is the district service area defined by that red line there. And it was formed in 2004. The district itself was formed in 2004 to assist the state of Colorado with compact compliance. That is its sole purpose, and that's what the district does. The district has a 17-member board of directors, and it encompasses 7,800 square miles. The average annual withdrawals from the basin are about 700,535 acre feet each year, And there are about 566,340 irrigated acres in that district boundary that you're seeing there. Approximately 50,000 of the total irrigated acres have been retired, are no longer used for irrigation. There are about 3,341 large capacity wells that operate in the district, and there is, from 2013, there is a compact compliance pipeline that also helps meet the compact obligation requirement. So what we're here to talk about is a surface water rights purchase. And I've listed here the water rights that have already been purchased. And again, the whole idea with the district is compact compliance. The reason why those water rights have already been purchased, the district had an opportunity to get these water rights, and if they delayed for reason of going through our process, they were concerned that they would lose that opportunity to get those water rights. So those water rights were purchased, I believe, just this summer. I think it was August. I'm sure others can correct me. So fairly recently, but that's why I'm kind of talking in past tense, that they have been purchased, but these funds requested here will go toward those. For those who know the area at all, a little bit closer up view is North Fork surface water rights. Those were Hayes Creek Ditch and Hayes Creek Ditch number 3. South Fork surface water rights included Hale Ditch, Tipjack Ditch, and the Hutton 1 and 2. They anticipate that the project should be completed next year, 2020. So in summary, the total project costs are $6,925,000. That's the cost for those water rights we just talked about. A CWCB loan, $5,570,150 at 1.20% for 20 years gives an annual loan payment of $314,924. And the collateral to secure will remain the pledge of assessment revenues from the district, as well as those surface rights. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them or have others.
Thank you, Rachel. Are there any
Welcome.
questions for Rachel? Director Brody?
So I just want to make sure I understand, since they've already acquired the water right, how would the funding from the board be used? Would it have other sources of, funding that they've used in the short term? How does it support the acquisition?
They've used their money to purchase those surface rights. And so this loan would be then for the district, specifically for those water rights. And we would require a water rights appraisal of those rights.
So essentially they would refund themselves for what they outlaid?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director Yan?
Thanks, Rachel.
Sure.
And thanks for being here, Deb and Dave. I just want to say, I don't know if you caught all that so that everybody recognizes what's gone on here. So they were formed, the Republican River Water Conservancy District was formed in 2004. And they started from nothing, and they are currently assessing their farmers $14.50 an acre. And so these farmers have seen this increase in their costs right away to do this, and they've put in a $60 million pipeline. So this has all happened within these last few years. They've drained Bonnie Reservoir as part of the compact compliance, which is really their only recreation reservoir in the area. They went through legislation to expand the district boundaries so they match the compact language, I guess, the model domain. and they're implementing the CREP and retirement of acres and all of these things in this short amount of time. And it's a pretty incredible job. So I just wanted to say, you know, Deb, thanks for all your work, and David and Rod and the whole board. It's not an easy thing, I'm sure, because whenever you deal with a lot of people that weren't assessed anything, and now you're doing all this work to try to get up to compact compliance, it's a big undertaking, and they've done an incredible job. And now they're purchasing some surface water rights to help offset some of those depletions as well. So I just wanted to point that all out and just say thanks for all your work out in the Republican River District. And with that, I would move staff approval on this loan.
I have a question. Okay, it's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Goebel to approve staff recommendation. Director Trick.
I just had a question about the collateral on this. So was there an assignment of certain portions of the collateral between the assessment revenues and the water rights? Like a percentage, or how is that allocated?
Typically, I would say that collateral there, if there were an issue, which I don't think in particular in this case, I can't foresee that there being a default. The pledge of assessment revenues is probably something that's very secure with the funding, with the repayment of any funds that were borrowed. The surface water rights, those, we could take those and sell those, but those would be a little bit harder to try to find a purchaser. So does that answer your question?
Well, I guess
there's not a specific percentage.
I could make a better question for you then. If you mentioned an appraisal was going to be done, if the appraisal comes back and shows, for example, that they can't prove historic consumptive use, or there's issues with whether or not they can divert these, et cetera, is there an opportunity for the collateral to be assigned completely to the assessment revenues, for example?
Yes.
Okay.
Any additional discussion? Deb and David, you came all this way. I'd be remiss if we didn't invite you up to make some comments before we vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is David Robbins. I'm the General Counsel of the Republican River Water Conservation District. I just wanted to address a couple of things. The first one is that the district is acquiring effectively all of the active surface water rights in the Republican Basin to assist the state of Colorado in compliance with the Republican River Compact. Because this is a surface water flow compact, the compact doesn't mention groundwater, but the Supreme Court determined that, in fact, the groundwater in the High Plains Aquifer is in hydrologic connection with the river, and as a result, pumping from wells are treated as if they are connected and their depletions accounted for. The district's intention is to acquire these water rights, and in cooperation with the Colorado Water Trust and this board, to convert them all from their current uses, which is irrigation, to in-stream flow, environmental use, and for compact compliance, basically to remove the losses that occur as a result of surface water diversion from these streams to increase the amount of water in these streams for those purposes. The other thing that this will allow us to do is reduce the amount of groundwater that we pump through the compact compliance pipeline into the North Fork of the river to make up any differential between the amount of actual flow in the river and the amount that is required to be delivered to our neighboring states. The 5 million plus, I want to point out, the district borrowed $60 million from this board and has already repaid about half of it. So the question about are you going to get your money back, I think the district has established for you that in the course of 10 years or so, to have made those sorts of payments establishes their bona fide. The pipeline that was constructed with that is a viable proper way for us to be achieving compact compliance. And as to the $5 million, in addition to the 2 water rights that the board stretched its budget to acquire during this year, that this $5 million would help them sort of get their budget back where they would like it to be. They also are intending to acquire the last third of the largest water right on the South Fork through an exchange with with Dan's organization, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Parks and Wildlife owns 1/3 of the Hale Ditch. The district owns the other 2/3. The Hale Ditch is the ditch that has the largest effect on how Bonnie Reservoir is operated. If the district can acquire the entire ditch and put it into an in-stream flow purpose, we can then work with the Bureau to amend or modify the outlet works from Bonnie so that the reservoir works better from an environmental standpoint. And Deb and Rod and the members of the South Fork Restoration Coalition are working on that process. So this is double bangs for the buck. If you can loan them the money, they can complete the transaction with Parks and Wildlife, and then they can get busy and figure out how to get Bonnie put back together. So this is really an investment in not only compact compliance to keep Kevin happy, but also an investment in a significant effort to restore 3 High Plains riverine systems that they used to drive the chuck wagons by and the Conestoga wagons and everything. So get it back like that. Thank you very much. Deb?
You know, Mr. Robbins, he said it all. Do you have something specifically for me?
Deb, thank you for making the trip up. We really appreciate it. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We very much appreciate it.
Okay, we are on to agenda item 10B. Cole.
Cole Bedford, CWCB staff. I'm very thankful for first-time experiences. Yep. Yeah. This is item 10B, loan application for the Springdale Ditch Diversion Replacement Project for the Springdale Ditch Company located in Logan County. The project site's in Division 1 on the South Platte, just upriver of Sterling. The small community of Atwood is right there if you're familiar with it. The borrower, again, is the Springdale Ditch Company. Their loan request amount is $1,222,100, and the loan terms for that loan would be 30 years at 1.45%. The primary contact for this loan is Mr. Ken Fritzler. He's the president of the company. He's here today along with the vice president, Brad Anderson, and Matt Harris of Harris Engineering, who prepared the application and feasibility study. The Springdale Ditch Company was founded in 1886 to operate the ditch. They have 831.5 shares divided among 51 shareholders. They irrigate about 3,500 agricultural acres in the Sterling area there, and their average annual diversion in the last 5 years or so has been 12,780 acre feet. Their diversion is located in a braided section of the river here. They're off the north side, and that braided configuration was likely a result of the 1965 flood. Their original diversion predates that, and so to sort of direct flows into their structure, they have this sand dam that's about a mile upstream that they maintain. There's some of their maintenance costs are involved in taking care of that, and annually after spring floods, they typically have to replace parts of that. And so the diversion structure is upstream here on the northern side. It's about 70 years old. It was built in the 1940s. It's experiencing cracking and decay. It's a concrete structure. They have significant problems with sediment buildup behind that diversion. And it's difficult to see here, but their head gate is also down the ditch a little ways, and so they've got sediment buildup behind that as well. And so here's a few pictures of the structures to just show kind of the condition. The top left there is the diversion structure from the downstream side. The top right is the diversion structure again from the top. That's Ken up there. Maintenance is pretty precarious. The head gate is on the bottom left there. That's just manually operated. And then there's another angle at the head gate there on the bottom right. So this is the proposed replacement structure that Harris Engineering put together. Other than being oriented in the river a little bit differently, it's in the same location as the existing structure. You can see that the head gate has been moved to the top of the ditch. That'll help with sedimentation a little bit. The crest of the diversion has also been dropped a little to help with sedimentation. And then both of those structures will have bladder gates installed to help with operation and additionally add with some sedimentation passage. This solution doesn't remove the maintenance on the sand structure or the sand dam upstream, but their expectation is that that sediment passing by will help, flows will be a little bit more naturally flowing into that northern portion of the braid. So the project financials are in table 3 of the memo. They're summarized here. The total project cost is $1,210,000. With the loan service fee, that'll be $1,222,100. At a term of 30 years, the company qualifies for a blended rate of 1.45%. Their annual loan obligation for the first 10 years will be $55,580. Table 4 of the memo there shows the financial ratios. They indicate that the company has a strong financial standing. A vote of the shareholders authorizing the company to take on the loan debt, for which a small assessment increase will probably be necessary, was held earlier this year. And collateral for the loan is a pledge of assessment revenues and the project itself. The company has no outstanding debt for which the collateral will require parity. So that I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Cole. Are there any questions for Cole? And I believe we've got some folks in the audience here, some board members, Ken and Brad, and then Matt, your engineer. So if you guys have any comments and would like to address the board, please introduce yourself.
I am Ken Fritzler, President of Springdale, and I'd like to thank CWCB staff, the board, and Cole for an excellent job on getting us to this point, because it's going to be a major improvement on us diverting water. So the only issue I got is the Snyder Ditch is getting theirs in, and they're going to flush sand down to us, so we're going to have a ton of sand this spring. Thank you.
All right, any additional questions for any of the project participants or Cole? Director Yon.
Yeah, I'd just like to attest to the danger of the current facility there, so this is a good improvement. I went out there with the ditch rider one time a couple years ago, and he was explaining to me how he operated. He said, well, it's a good thing he's a calf roper, because he tied his lasso to one of the planks, and then he would pull it out, and it would roll through, and then he'd haul it up, and he'd set it up on the walk. And so it was quite interesting how he operated it. So this is going to be a much-needed improvement for the Springdale Ditch Company. And so with that, I would move approval staff recommendation on agenda item 10B.
Okay, it's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Goebel to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 10B. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed? Motion carries. Good job, Cole.
All right, again for the record, Cole Bedford, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 10C. This is the loan application for the groundwater management subdistrict of the Central Colorado Water Conservation District for the Hoekstra Reservoir Purchase and Improvements Project. This project is also in Division 1. It's on the St. Vrain, a tributary of the South Platte, on just off of I-25 near Longmont and Firestone there. The borrower, again, is the Groundwater Management Subdistrict. They're also known as GMS. The loan request for this one is $5,444,405, the terms for which are 30 years at 1.45%. The primary contact on this one is Randy Ray. He's the executive director of GMS. He was here a little bit earlier if you got a chance to talk to him, but he had to take off since we're moving a little late. But he wanted me to pass on to you his appreciation of your guys' consideration. So this is the GMS's district. You can see the South Platte in blue there. Central is the overall parent district outlined in black there. Their GMS then is the sub-district, and their regions are shown in pink on this map. They were founded in 1973, and they were primarily an augmentation districts. They augment 892 wells annually, and their allotment is 66,744 acre feet. And then in red off on the left there is the site for the Hoekstra project. And this is that same region there just on Google. And you can see a little bit better here what this region is. DIA is down at the bottom, and you can see a lot of the center pivot irrigation circles that both Central and GMS support. This is the project site in a little bit more detail. And so Hoekstra Reservoir is previously a gravel pit. There's 4 separate cells in the pit. Cell 2 there has been completely mined out and is currently holding water. And then cell 5-6 is nearly completely mined out and then is also intermittently holding water. And then 4 and 3 there have a little bit of work to do before they're totally mined out. They're currently using cell 2 and 5-6 using diesel pumps to operate flows in and out and then passing into the St. Vrain. But they need more permanent infrastructure. They're looking at vertical turbine pumps, bringing power to the sites, and then inlet and outlet infrastructure. This is what the site looked like a couple months ago when I went out there. Cell 2 is at the top, looking northwest, and the interstate's in the distance there. And then cell 5-6 is at the bottom. When I went out to visit, it currently wasn't holding water, and that's looking northeast. So the project financials on this one, the total project cost is $5,390,500. With the service fee, that'll be $5,444,405. They qualify for a 1.5 agricultural interest rate for 30 years, and their annual obligation given that will be $247,607. Their financial ratios in the memo indicate that they're a strong to average borrower. And the collateral for this is a pledge of assessment revenues plus a portion of the project equal in value to the loan amount. And so I'll take any questions you have on that one.
Are there any questions for Cole? Let's continue with staff recommendation.
The staff recommendation on this one is that the board approve a loan not to exceed $5,444,405 to the Groundwater Management Subdistrict acting by and through the Water Activity Enterprise of the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District for the Hoekstra Reservoir Purchase and Improvements Project from the Severance Tax Perpetual Base Fund. The loan terms shall be 30 years at an agricultural interest rate of 1.45 per annum. Security for the loan shall be in compliance with CWCB Financial Policy Number 5.
Great. Director Yon.
All right. Another good project from the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District, and they've been working hard. You know, we had the Walker Recharge project, which we saw, I think, at the last meeting or something. But they're getting a lot of things up and running to try to cover all their well depletion. So I want to applaud them on that. So anyway, with that, I would recommend, or I would move staff recommendation on agenda item 10C.
It's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Schwartz to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 10C. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We are now to agenda item 11, changes to existing loans.
Rachel Pittenger, CWCB staff. I will be presenting agenda item 11A. I think that's where we are. Arkansas River and Wild Horse Creek levees with the Pueblo Conservancy District. Note the cover picture. The project is located in the city of Pueblo, Division 2, Arkansas Basin. The borrower is the Pueblo Conservancy District. In 2018, their project was approved in the project's bill for $17,170,000. The reason I'm in front of you today is they are requesting a loan increase of $6,060,000, which brings the total project cost to $23,230,000. So I know that the board is authorized or has authorization to approve up to $10 million projects. So that $6 million, yes, less than 10, but we're looking at it as the overall project being more than 10, which is that 23 million. Loan terms will be the same, 30 years at 2.45. I've been working with Ms. Corinne Kohler, she's the president, and Mr. Don Banner, he is the attorney with Pueblo Conservancy District, and he is here in attendance today. So the district itself was organized in 1922 in response to the 1921 flood. The construction of the levees were completed about 1926. And these photos that I'm showing you here are of recent work in the past year and a half of the levee structure in one of the phases. And as you can see here from these photos, part of the project is the refacing of the slope of the levee and filling the voids and removing and getting rid of that. But it's also bringing down the levee, reducing the height of that levee. The district boundaries are approximately 1 mile wide by 11 miles long and pretty much follow the Arkansas River. Wild Horse Creek is identified on this Google map as well as the Arkansas River, and just for frame of reference, the city of Pueblo is right there. Arkansas levee extends 13,000 feet, 9.5 miles west of Pueblo, and continues through the city, while Wild Horse Creek levee extends on the east side of Wild Horse Creek from 11th Street to 18th Street, for those of you who know the city of Pueblo. So as a result of 2005 Hurricane Katrina, FEMA issued a ruling that all levees in the U.S. must be certified to FEMA standards, and that's what started this whole project way back when. This project has been a significant investment and has taken a significant amount of time and is needed to be phased. The phases I've tried to identify there as best I can. This particular loan increase will cover, is going to be focused on phase 6 of this project. And again, it's the same type work. It will be to repair the levee and bring them up to FEMA standards and provide flood protection to the city. So what's left? Wild Horse Creek is finished. The levee at Wild Horse Creek is finished. So it will focus on the Arkansas River here. Construction of 3,000 lineal feet is complete of the Wild Horse, and another 3,300 lineal feet of the Arkansas River will be focused on for this phase. Let's see, that'll include replacing concrete in the levee face, grouting, filling voids, and connecting portions of the maintenance roads below the bridges, because right now as you kind of go along the top of the levee, there's these dips. So they're going to try and smooth those dips off to make access and maintenance much more safe. They anticipate construction completion by the end of next year. I have some photos here for you. The top left photo is the mechanism they use, the setup they use for placing that concrete on those. Those are large panels, and so placing that concrete there is kind of impressive to watch. Finished product is on the top right. And just to show you the magnitude of the change of the levee, the bottom left, there's a Hard Rock Cafe sign, right? You can kind of see up above by the blue sky, there's a little bit of a rooftop of a building. The bottom right photo, that's the same building. And you can't quite tell, about halfway up that Hard Rock Cafe sign is the top of the new levee. And so you might say, why is the reason, why would they reduce the levee? Well, at the time the levee was constructed, Pueblo Reservoir had not been built. And so Pueblo Reservoir was built in, I believe, 1975, mid-70s, I think. Long after the levee was constructed in 1926. So this allows them, with the reservoir, this allows them to bring that levee height down and save construction costs. So total project costs are going to be about $23 million. With CWCB, service fee is $23,230,000. So this is an increase of $6,060,000 again, which must go through projects bill. 2.45% low income rate for 30 years creates a $1,102,489 annual loan payment. The collateral will remain the same, and that will be a pledge of revenues from the district's maintenance assessment fund. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to address them.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Are there any questions for Rachel or for Dawn, who's in the audience? Director Schwartz.
Thank you. And that was a red flag, the projects bill, I think, that this would be included in the projects bill. Is that correct?
Yes,
The new loan.
that's the
I think that's
plan.
appropriate, but I did have a question about the cash reserves and current expenses being in a weak position, according to the table. Do I have that correct? I'm just questioning that and our thoughts on the security of the loan. It's table 4 on agenda item 15A. Do I have that correct?
Which?
I'm
the cash reserves on my table 4 show strong. We're on 11A, not 15A.
My apology. I got ahead of myself. I'm sorry. Thank you. But point taken. Thank you.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Director Goebel.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think it was a good project when we approved it 2 years ago, and I think it's still a good project. And I drove over it twice yesterday and saw excavators out there. So maybe, I don't know if they're getting ready for construction, Mr. Brenner, or what, but anyway, it's looking good. So are we ready for staff recommendation?
Apology. That was on the 2017 agenda. It was item 15A. So sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay. I think maybe before we get to staff recommendation, Dawn, you drove all this way. Do you have anything to add?
Nothing but thanks for the initial loan, and thanks for your volunteer service as board members, and thanks for considering this.
Thank you. Okay, Rachel, we'll take staff recommendation.
Okay. Staff recommends the board request the General Assembly authorize a loan for $23,230,000 to the Pueblo Conservancy District in the 2020 CWCB projects bill.
Thank you. Director Goebel.
I move to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 11A.
It's been moved by Director Goebel and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 11A. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Rachel Pittenger, CWCB staff. I will be discussing agenda item 11B, the West Half Laramie Pooter Tunnel Rehabilitation Project with the Tunnel Water Company. This is also a loan increase. So the project is located, it's a basin diversion tunnel, and it's located between North Platte and South Platte basins from the Laramie River to Cache la Poudre. The loan amount that was originally approved in March from the CWCB board was for $9,090,000. The request, the loan increase this time is for $2,525,000, bringing a total project cost to $11,615,000. And the reason for that increase is due to project cost increases, more materials needed. Loan terms will be the same, 30 years at 2.85%. And I've been working with Mr. Dennis Harmon, who is the general manager for the tunnel company, Tunnel Water Company. So here's a good picture, kind of a flyover, Laramie River, Cache la Poudre. That body of water, kind of in the lower portion of that photo, is Chambers Lake. Cameron Pass is southwest of where we are now. So just to give you a brief overview, we'll just go through this quick. You just saw it in March. It's a 2.2 mile long tunnel. It was constructed in 1910. Tunnel Water Company purchased it in 1938. It's 15,755 acre feet annual diversions go through that tunnel. There are two shareholders, Water Supply and Storage Company, as well as the Windsor Reservoir and Canal Company. 40,000 irrigated acres are under Laramie County Canal under the Water Supply and Storage Company service area, and Soldier Canyon Filter Plant and Bellevue Water Treatment Plant for municipal use are associated with the Windsor Reservoir and Canal Company shares. Here's an image of the tunnel layout, the west portal to the east portal. So to remind you, the tunnels were, sections of the tunnels, the void spaces were significant, were large. And so I decided to include a photo of that. Structural member is shown in that left photo that's rotting timbers. Again, tunnel portal there, or a shot through the tunnel on those square timbers. So the idea of this project, the whole point to this, purpose to this project is to prevent future tunnel collapse and continue water deliveries to the shareholders and improve stable access for maintenance. Additional material and structural support is needed beyond the original quantified estimate, increasing overall project costs. Replacement, construction includes the replacement of existing support systems, installation of those rock bolts, shotcrete, rubble removal, and then if you remember, they're working on expanding the tunnel to about 7 foot by 7 foot so they can access and maintain it a little bit better. They anticipate this work to be done by spring 2021. They can only work in non-irrigation seasons. Here are some photos here. Grout, you can see that gray spotty grout in that top left photo. Some of those structural members, those structural steel sets, they had estimated they could place those about every 4 feet, and in some sections they had to come down to less than about 2 feet because there was just no structural integrity in the tunnel. So that's part of the material cost. As you see there, the bottom left photo, you can see all those rock bolts placed in there, and then more tunnel work on the bottom right. So in summary, total project costs $11,615,000. CWCB loan, the original was $9,090,000. The increase is $2,525,000 at 2.85 blended interest rate for 30 years. The collateral will remain a pledge of the assessment revenues from the company and the project itself.
Thank you, Rachel. Is Dennis here?
He is here.
I am. Hi. Hi, Dennis. Would you like to address the board? Sure. Please introduce yourself. Thank
I'm
you.
Dennis Harmon, for the record, General Manager of Tunnel Water Company and its biggest shareholder, Water Supply and Storage Company. I would just like to say thank you in advance for your consideration of this very important project for us. The tunnel supplies a huge share of our annual water, probably in the neighborhood of 25 to 30%. And as you may be aware, these things need maintenance. It's a very old tunnel. There are sections of it that varying construction done at varying times over the decades, and it was badly in need of some work here. We got into some things that we didn't expect, which happens in this kind of work, and therefore we're here asking you for some additional support. But thanks very much for consideration.
Thank you for being here. Are there any questions for Rachel or for Dennis? Director Yon.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, Dennis, for making the trip up here. It is an important project to get it rehabilitated and working like it should work. So, so I'm glad that you're bringing that back to us. With that, I would move staff recommendation on agenda item 11B.
It's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Goebel to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 11B. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Okay, if you guys don't mind, let's keep this show going. And if instead of taking a break, maybe if people want to get up at their leisure, but Kirk, let's keep rolling. So we are at agenda item 12, which is the projects bill.
Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. Agenda item 12A is the first agenda item of a batch of projects bill related items, and I wanted to start off with, as Rachel finished up that last loan and Cole presentation he did, we're very fortunate to have him on board. A reminder that we were able to do all those grants because of borrowers like those that are in the audience that are willing to take on obviously a good interest rate, but still it does stretch the pocketbook when they've got to do these very important projects. So to talk about the projects bill, I want to go back and make sure everybody's aware of where we were to get to this point. This starts back in early August when we receive applications for non-reimbursable investments. And we have an internal review of all those applications. Many of them are internal to CWCB in some of the ongoing activities we have. Then we bring those that are recommended to the Finance Committee at the September Finance Committee meeting. And we look for recommendation to then push it to the full board, and that's where we are now. Once this board approves those non-reimbursable investments and the lists of items in this agenda item, it becomes the framework of a request to the legislature for inclusion in the 2020 projects bill. In January, traditionally, I will bring you that framework document, and in it won't only have these items that are decision related to money. There might be some statutory changes that we need to make, whether it be a statute that is expiring or things like that. So there will be another shot at what is included in the projects bill. And the projects bill is traditionally sponsored by the House Rural Affairs and Ag Chair and the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Chair. So one of the places we start is we evaluate what the construction fund and severance tax can produce in non-reimbursable opportunities. And it's very complex in that we make promises for loans and grants, and anything that we've promised that is non-reimbursable, I'm assuming that is taken out of the equation. And my goal is to grow the remaining amount of money to match construction inflation. So we want to always stay up with construction inflation, and that's what makes these non-reimbursable investments available. a quick explanation of why the agenda item is formatted the way it is. This agenda item A, 12A, is a batch of 9 items that during the Finance Committee, it seemed that they cleared a path for approval without a lot of need for additional presentation from staff. You will notice that all of the data sheets are behind this agenda item. If you need to review them again, staff is available in the audience if there is any questions at this point. But those are the same items that were presented at the Finance Committee. And so at the end of this, I will be making a motion to approve them as a block. Agenda item B are items that we felt, based on the conversation at Finance Committee, it would be good for the board to hear some additional information about those. There may have been some unanswered questions, or just a need to elevate the story about those items to the board. And so there are 3 items that are in 12B. One of them is actually new. It was not presented at the Finance Committee, and it is the one related to ATM funding. Agenda item C is our 4th year of recommended water plan implementation funding activities, of which water plan grants is a portion of that. And then the last item is the Ark Valley Conduit request, funding package request. So with that, I will recommend staff approval of agenda item 12A to include approvals of satellite monitoring for $380,000, Colorado map modernization program continuation for $500,000, weather modification continuation for $350,000, Colorado Mesonet project continuation of $150,000, LiDAR acquisition continuation activity for $200,000, litigation fund refresh, which is up to $2 million, but our estimate is actually about $1.2 million based on expenditures. Number 7, the Arkansas River DSS, a continuation of that very important project, is $500,000. CDSS operations and maintenance is a continuation to maintain our CDSS program, is $500,000. And then the last item, number 9, is the Watershed Forecasting Partnership continuation for $350,000 for a total of $4.13 million to be included in the projects bill. And I would be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Kirk. Are there any questions about agenda item 12A 1 through 9? Director Hawkins.
I would move approval of staff recommendation on items 12A 1 through 9.
It's been moved by Director Hawkins and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12A 1 through 9. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Kirk. Okay, we are at agenda item 12B, non-reimbursable project investment presentations. Who's doing the Fish and Wildlife Resource? Well.
He was in the restroom.
Go get him, Lauren.
Let's go ahead and yeah. Let's go ahead and do B2. If yep, let's do it, Kevin. Thank you.
Sorry.
There's Krister.
You lost out. Okay, Kevin Reedy, CWCB staff for the record, 12B2 2020 projects bill. This is the Colorado Water Loss Initiative Phase 2. I presented at the Finance Committee back in September, kind of refresh everybody's memory on this, that we're still in Phase 1 of this. We're going to finish up about late summer next year. So I wanted to try to get something in place now so we can kind of continue on with this project. So it's been very successful. We had about 116 water providers across the state register. It doesn't mean all of them are really participating 100%, but that's a huge registration. And we've been doing these workshops and then technical one-on-ones. So we've got about 60 to 70 that have completed their technical one-on-one phone calls to go over their data with our consultant team. But the idea is that they're going to go through their water system, distribution system, create a water audit, and look at the diagnostic and figure out where their water loss is happening. It could be real, as in leaks and things like that, or it could be apparent, such as faulty meters, underreporting meters, billing errors, theft, things like that. Basically, the apparent is something that they're not getting money for. Losses are what they're also not getting money for, but it's a physical loss as well. So we're going to try to build on this phase one with this program and really go into more advanced topics with these existing water providers, but also do some really targeted interventions. The process, how this works, is that you go through this basic level that we're doing now, and then you can start setting yourself for more success and figure out what you need to do. It kind of basically focuses your resources. And I just want to have a note on this that I was looking at this, and we're the only state that's really doing statewide training that's voluntary and not legislative mandated. So that's a good thing. We've got a lot of good, it's hard to retain this participation in this because it's not mandated. But California, Georgia, Hawaii, those states have requirements. Nevada just passed a requirement just in the last couple months as well, so they're going to have to report this stuff as well. I know Arizona and Utah are looking at this, but I don't think they're going to mandate it at this point. So anyway, I think this is a pretty good success story, and it's interesting. We're learning something from this because how do you do this without a legislative mandate, and how do you get the interest in this? Of course, we're offering these things for free, but to get people to come to the table and do all this work is kind of difficult. So I'm kind of happy so far with what we're doing. It's not as many as we thought we could get, but still, I'll take 116 registered for sure. And so basically what we want to do is we want to move on to this phase two, and in your data sheet you can kind of see a rough idea of what I was thinking. And the idea is we want to retain the people that we've got now, right, and move them into more advanced topics, but also get new folks and smaller providers, more rural providers, those kind of things. So we're going to focus on that for this next phase. We've got some small ones now, but for the most part, it's really mostly these larger providers that are doing this stuff now. So anyway, going to go through this. Task one would be these 101 workshops, doing the basic stuff we're doing now. Two would be level 2 and 3 workshops, much more advanced topics that we would get into with that. And then really ranking and prioritizing technical assistance and going in and doing the technical assistance. That's what we're not doing right now. We're really kind of hitting them with the basics. And but out of the ones that are participating now, I've just heard back that 6 have already moved on to more advanced stuff because they were more advanced than maybe we thought. And so they're doing more advanced work right now already. So. And so it would be really broken down between technical assistance, really looking at these intervention strategies of where we focus on recruitment and retention. Really important, as I mentioned before. It's difficult to keep people engaged when it's not mandatory, or at least a little more difficult. Education 101 validation workshops, the 201, 301 workshops, and then and some more technical assistance and level 1 validation. So, and just to reiterate, this is pretty much the state of the art. This is what AWWA, the American Water Works Association, this is their methodology. It's a volunteer-generated methodology that has come out of about 20 years of creation and work on this from people from all over the water industry. And really what they do is they create these methodologies in these volunteer groups, such as I'm on the AWWA Water Conservation Division for the national division, and so we create policies and things like that on the water conservation side. But there's a whole water loss group, and these folks spend their time doing these things. So, and the folks I'm working with right now are very much engaged in that working group, and they're some of the leaders in that as well. So, without further ado, that's all I've got to kind of brief you guys. I'm open to questions. If you guys have any questions on this or you're curious, if burning questions, nagging questions, what is this?
Director Hawkins.
Thanks, Kevin. I saw the note in here about efforts to get more rural water providers.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to double check that this is going to get outside the front range with this level of funding.
Definitely. And we've had good participation from across the state. It's just not all the way, into some of these places. And I know, Jackie, you brought that up as well. Director Brown, I should say. You brought that up last time about trying to get to the more rural providers. Especially, we're looking at the Southwest, the northwest, all the corners really, the northeast and southeast as well. And we've got a lot of water providers down in the lower Arkansas that we've worked with before in the past, but we haven't been able to bring them to the table at this one. So looking at the Colorado Rural Water Association to help out with that, I'd be open to any suggestions because we're trying to figure out a way to make those inroads in there. And then figure out how to make this work for them because, some of the stuff is daunting and some of the times they won't have the information they need. So how do we approach that then when that happens? If they've got, we've got 1.5 people, we've got everything on paper, and the guys that I've been working with have run into that in other places. They did all of California, about 450 utilities, and they ran from everything from metropolitan down in southern California to these really small rural water providers that they didn't have the technology and the people to do it. So, but yes, that's the goal of this.
I appreciate that effort and echo the other directors' enthusiasm to get this out in the corners, and don't forget the central south.
I hear you.
I know that I'm sure that others would be willing, but if you need to make those connections, if you're willing to come down, I'd be happy to call all the providers, and I'm sure they'd show up to listen to your ideas, and I bet that's true in other areas. So
good. Thank you.
Thank you for putting this together, Director Schwartz.
And thank you. I echo as well. I guess the other part of this, besides all the technical expertise and assessment, is that if there's a structural issue, do we have resources or access to resources to help fund some of the costs associated with those more structural problems? Because one, your ratepayers oftentimes can't carry that load. And so what kind of resources do you have to offer districts that may come on board that have identified those problems?
Yeah, good question. So as you know that, our loan program, right, it really focuses on raw water side, but the loan program can focus on meters. So that's one of the intervention spots that we're going to find some issues with, where they've got to get new meters or replace source meters, which are those big meters that are at the treatment plants. And when those go bad, you get really crazy haywire readings, and you don't know what you're delivering at that point. So on that point, we've got the resources, I think, from the loan. But when you get into pipes and things like that, I was just thinking of Mike Brode today when he was talking about those projects and the $9 billion, and that's an issue anywhere that we're going to run into. So the idea is to identify that. We don't have, CWCB does not have those resources to fund pipeline replacements and things like that. But we can go with the meter side of it. I know that much. But I think that might be a state revolving fund kind of discussion where they get into those kind of things if they said, yeah, we've got issues. And the point of this is kind of a diagnostic, is to kind of point people to the right place to focus on the right resource and what the real problem is, right? And, I've had people say, well, I'll just do leak detection. If I have to do leak detection, if you're making me do leak detection, I'll do it. I'm like, well, I don't want you to do it if you don't need to do it. That's something that you want to figure out if that's your problem, or if it's a meter, or if it's billing issues or something like that. We can help fund, on that apparent side, metering and software and billing systems and things like that. Where the rub comes in is with everybody, with all infrastructure, is the pipes in the ground, and that can be really, really expensive. So that's a tough one because it's tough to approach there.
Thanks.
Any additional questions or comments for Kevin? I think we're ready for staff recommendation.
Okay, great. Okay, so staff recommends the board approve $1 million in non-reimbursable investments for the Colorado Water Loss Initiative Phase 2 to be included in the 2020 projects bill.
Director Schwartz.
I move agenda item number 12B2 per staff recommendation. I move approval.
Okay, great. Is that you, Director Trick? All right. It's been moved by Director Schwartz and seconded by Director Trick to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12B2. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Kevin.
Great, thank you.
All right, Chris Sturm, you can have the spotlight again.
Good afternoon, Chris Durham, CWCB staff for the record. This is item 12B1, non-reimbursable project investments, Fish and Wildlife Resources Fund refresh. The Fish and Wildlife Resources Fund is a cost share grant program, and it is set up to mitigate impacts to fish and wildlife that are imparted by new or existing water delivery or diversion structures. And those, the process to approve the grants are outlined in two different board policies, both Policy 15 and Policy 20 that are in your packet. Policy 20 deals with how we approve grants submitted from entities that are developing new water storage or delivery projects and have a federal nexus and a mitigation requirement through a state fish and wildlife mitigation plan. Whereas Policy 15 deals with how we approve grants for projects that are existing where the applicant or owner of the project wants to mitigate the impacts from that existing project. And with that, I will take any questions.
Are there any questions for Chris? Director Hawkins.
Thanks, Chris. I found this portion of the board packet to be helpful. I know I asked the question at the Finance Committee. I was wondering how we came to the potential need for $1 million. Is it mostly in like mitigation of new projects, or do we have some mitigation of existing projects coming in?
As far as projects on the horizon, I'm not aware of any. Nobody has expressed an interest in the recent past into tapping into this program. The $1 million was arrived at based on the history of the program, which is on the data sheet. So we kind of looked at the relative needs in the past and where we were, and thought $1 million was a good amount if we saw similar applications come in. I'll add to that this grant process is a little bit more onerous than some of our existing grant processes that we have now. In the past, this was one of just a couple opportunities to mitigate impacts, especially for existing projects, and many of the projects on this list were existing projects, so they were funded through Board Policy 15. As folks are coming to me now asking to do these types of projects, I'm first directing them to the Watershed Restoration Program, which has been well funded, and the Water Plan Grant Program, the Environment and Rec category, as it's usually an easier process than going through the Fish and Wildlife Resources Fund. So given that, I think this $1 million would probably best be reserved for any new projects where the applicant wants to share the mitigation costs with the board per the Policy 20.
Any additional questions? All right. Did you already give staff recommendation, Chris?
I did not, Madam Chair, but I will do that now.
Let's
Staff
do it.
recommends the board's approval to authorize a transfer of $1 million from the construction fund to the Fish and Wildlife Resources Fund.
Director Yon.
I move staff recommendation on agenda item 12, what is it? 12B1.
It's been moved by Director Yon and seconded by Director Brown to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12B1. Is there any discussion? Director Brown.
Sorry, I have a question. I thought I had it answered before, but this rolls over year to year.
Yes.
So did I miss what's in the fund currently?
The fund, as it stands now, is essentially zeroed out.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chris. All right, we are at agenda item 12B3.
This is Alex Funk, CWCB staff for the record for item 12B3, which is the Alternative Transfer Method Grant Program refresh. This program was authorized in 2007 to provide cost share resources to further examine and assist in the development and implementation of ATMs. It funds a wide range of types of projects, but really, covers the life cycle costs of an ATM project, everything from design to implementation to ongoing operation, and other projects that help achieve water plan goals associated with ATMs. A few reasons why we're seeking a refresh today and why this wasn't kind of brought up during the September Finance Committee. The first is right after that committee met, we received 2 grants that we'll hear tomorrow that are large grants to support ATM development, and that would kind of eat into our current balance of $1.2 million for this program. And given that we weren't requesting a refresh at that time, we felt that the remaining balance just wasn't really sufficient to get us to July 2021, given the demand that this program has seen recently. And I would really attribute that to 2 things. One, we've seen a lot of interest in this program, just given the number of pilot projects that have come online in the last few years. I think as more projects come online, we'll continue to see demand grow for this program. We also just have new tools that are now available. We have the Ag Water Protection Water Right that was finalized this year. We finally approved a administrative interruptible water supply agreement with the City of Fountain and Catlin. And so now that we have templates for those types of projects, that could drive more projects in the future. And then just emerging opportunities for these ATMs. We've had interests in Division 3 with the sub-districts in terms of ATMs and how they can be used to help sort of navigate the rules there. We've had interest from the environmental community on environmental ATMs. And so we continue to market this as a kind of broad tool to address different water resource challenges, and want some sufficient funding to support that envisioned need for this program moving forward. And with that, happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Alex. Are there any questions for Alex about this topic? Let's proceed to staff recommendation.
So staff recommends the board approve a $750,000 non-reimbursable investment for the ATM grant program to be included in the 2020 projects bill.
Director Goebel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12B3.
It's been moved by Director Goebel and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12B3. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thanks.
Thank you. Director Schwartz.
And thank you. I hate to go back, but this is a question, maybe Becky can answer it or Chris can come back, but with regard to the Upper Colorado, the fish recovery program, how do we fund our participation in that? It's for the Upper Colorado and the San Juan River Basin. I mean, does it come out of Fish and Wildlife Recovery Fund, or do we not fund it, or how's that go?
Amy?
Sure. We largely fund our participation through that program through the Species Conservation Trust Fund, which is a fund that receives revenues from severance tax that we split between Colorado Parks and Wildlife priorities and priorities from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And so I believe typically the projects that we will propose for the Species Conservation Trust Fund will be presented to the board during the January board meeting.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amy. All right, we are on to agenda item 12C, water plan funding. Lauren.
Hi again. Lauren Riss with CWCB. So this is agenda item 12C, and this is the package of grants that we put in the projects bill under the heading of water plan implementation funding. So I'm not going to regurgitate the history of this funding that's in the memo in your board packet, but I will go through and just highlight the different programs and the recommended funding levels for FY 2021. So in the past, we have funded WSRF out of the construction fund to supplement what they would receive through the severance tax Because of the anticipated funding levels, we're not planning on making a recommendation for WSRF supplemental funding. The watershed restoration program, we're recommending be funded at $4 million. And then the environment and rec water plan grant category, recommending as in the previous 2 years at $1.5 million. Alex covered the ATM grant program, which we include as part of this package of water plan funding at $0.75 million. The agricultural water plan grant category, again at $1.5 million. The storage and supply water plan grant category at $3 million. Conservation water plan grant at $1 million. Innovation and outreach at $500,000. And then in the past, we've also included some of the efforts related to the planning for the basin implementation updates and the technical updates to the water plan. When we initially brought this to you in September for the Finance Committee, we did not know the outcome of Proposition DD, and we had also not seen the governor's budget plans for this next year. And so as I was writing this memo, Prop DD passed, and so I kind of used this as the vehicle to incorporate some of that information about Proposition DD. Becky mentioned it in her director's report, so I won't repeat anything that she said, except to say that because we won't see funding through that initiative until May, we're not including an appropriation for that funding in this year's projects bill because we don't know what funding is going to come in the door. The other difference that I wanted to point out is, you may recall we had talked about putting $2 million towards diversion structures. And in light of this additional funding that we are anticipating receiving, both through the governor's budget and also through Proposition DD, we didn't feel like there was a need to put that funding into this year's projects bill, knowing that we have some additional funding sources coming in the door that have a little bit more flexibility. So those are the changes. I'm anticipating, based on this morning/afternoon's conversation related to the innovation and outreach category, that there may be some questions and discussion about that particular recommendation, and so I'm open to having that conversation, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll just leave it at that and take any questions.
Thank you, Lauren. Director Hawkins.
Thanks, Lauren. I can't really wrap my head around this decision without asking about both the general fund money that we have sitting now and the potential for there to be 10 million more. Could you talk us through the timing on that? I know that the 10 million was over 2 years. There's a potential for another 10 million. What's the timeline on us expending that if it moves through the budgeting process?
Right, so there's two different 10 millions. There's the 10 million that we received last year that we have to expend in 3 years' time. What is the fiscal year? I'm terrible at fiscal years. 21, 22? I'm looking at Amy. 21, 22? Okay, 21, 22. We have to have that funding expended. And so 1.75 of that went to the demand management feasibility study efforts, and 8.3 million of that went to the water plan grant program. And it was not appropriated to each category as the construction fund projects bill money is, so we have more flexibility with that, which I think we can take advantage of some of that flexibility in January when we plan to bring that item back to you and talk about putting more money into some of the water plan grant buckets. The next 10 million is, I think, still very much in development. The budget came out from the governor. It still has to go through the JBC process and then also has to be approved by the full legislature. It would likely be in what we call a JBC orbital bill, which sort of travels alongside the long bill through the legislative process. So it's definitely not a guarantee. And we're still working with the governor's office and putting together a plan for that funding.
So I'm a little concerned about the diversion, the multi-purpose diversion structure rehab money disappearing. So are we planning on funding that out of the existing remainder of the 8.3 million?
So I'm hesitating a little bit because there are some things that are in the works that just aren't public yet, but we are aware of that need and that demand that we've kind of taken the hit on the agriculture funding bucket. And so we're in discussions about how we can address that need with the funding that we have available.
Amy?
I guess I'll just add that the 8.3 million general fund appropriation from last year is really helpful to allow us to supplement funding, like the discussion that might happen with the innovation grant category. It allowed for that supplemental funding over 3 years, and so this year there was $3 million allocated, and so there is a portion of that that remains for the next 2 fiscal years that just provides some needed flexibility, I think, depending on grant applications and depending on demand that we see. The difficulty with the potential for a new 10 million general fund is it just follows a different timeline and track for discussions. There's some uncertainty just depending on how discussions go at the legislature, as to how those funds move through. And so this project bill recommendation is some certainty in construction fund. We know the balance that we feel comfortable moving forward with. And so the great thing about the 8.3 from last year is it provides some of that buffer and flexibility with the unknowns that we have with the potential new revenue through the general fund and then potential revenue down the road through Proposition DD.
And so I'll just add to that, everything Amy said is right on. And with the 8.3, we don't need to do anything with that in next year's projects bill because we already have it appropriated. So we already have it, and it provides more flexibility in which bucket and category we put it in. We are just a little bit tied in that it has to be spent by 21-22.
Director Hawkins.
I have 2 more questions. So how can we feel assured that there will be a way for that need for diversion structure rehabilitation to be met, given that it's not a current bucket?
So, you know, that those types of projects do qualify in the existing criteria and guidelines that we have for the grant program. I think both in the environment and rec bucket and in the agriculture bucket. So I think we do have the ability to fund those types of projects. I think when we came to you in September, it was just this realization that the funding need probably, you know, based on what we currently had available in those buckets was not going to meet that need. So, you know, we are going to continue to work and develop our plans for meeting that demand, and it will be if it doesn't work out through Prop DD or through these other funding conversations that we'll have, then we can revisit that with this board about how to make additional funding available through the general fund that we received last year.
And then my second question was, is there any update to the severance tax projections? Do we feel confident that we won't need to supplement WSRF for FY 2021 at this point?
Yeah, I think we do feel pretty good about that. I'm going to look at Kirk. I believe the most recent projection was they were going to get about 10 million? 5 for next year. 10 this year. Okay. So for this year, they'll receive 10. For next year, we're anticipating 5.
Just to clarify this and next year, so do you mean 10 within this fiscal year?
I'm going to let Kirk answer these questions
Okay.
because I'm going to get in over my head.
Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. The disbursement from severance tax into the Tier 2 WSRF program already happened for the current year, and that was the full 10 million. The projections that we're looking at during the course of this year will result in a distribution August, September of next year, and that right now looks about 5 million. So it has come up from the dismal number that we saw earlier, but it's still not 10. So that is as projected, 5 million right now in September of 2020.
Can you remind me at what level we tend to supplement that? Like, where's the line where we have felt the need to step in and supplement in the past?
I don't know that we had a line. I know that there were years that it was not receiving any funding, and there were so many projects that got stacked up We felt like the construction fund was a source for that. At this time, we just didn't propose that. We had the demands as you see in this list now, and so that just was not one of the recommendations.
Director Schwartz.
Thank you. Sorry to keep everybody awake. But just with regard to this conversation we've just had, when we're looking at these categories, and then we've had conversations about our grant distribution and criteria, just a thought, about broadening these categories? Maybe putting environmental and rec together, conservation, and the innovation, outreach, education. Because we had no flexibility, we didn't have any flexibility today to, when you see $2 million in one fund going without allocation, and then we see another fund, we're looking another cycle, and we have $136,000 left. I mean, can we build into this projects bill some additional flexibility? That, you know, when it's down on paper and it's adopted by the legislature in the projects bill, then we cut off our ability to work with funds when we, so just saying, just a question, can we look at some little movement in the categories, and so we can build in some additional flexibility and not lock it in like we saw today, and we can respond to the people that are coming forward with the grants we've already talked about, grant programs, criterias, deadlines. So can that all work together? And I don't know if that's a Becky question or Lauren question, but.
So I almost called you Senator Schwartz. Director Schwartz.
We go way back. This
old
is
habits,
that's a
I know,
problem.
sorry. So we have had those discussions in the past with the legislature and with the bill sponsors, and the categories that you see here, the bill sponsors felt very strongly about that. Were the committee chairs of the ag committees in both the House and the Senate. We could attempt to revisit that conversation. We did push pretty hard initially to have more flexibility with that funding source in anticipation of the dilemma that this would put us in. And we were not successful, but.
At least a preliminary conversation, just talking about what our challenges are, what our long-term goals are, we're just seeing our inability to respond through our programs. Just a conversation.
Good. Director Brown.
So, in the vein that there are no stupid questions, when we talk about the education and innovation, the grant, coming back in January, that would be coming from the general fund and being put into the innovation and outreach education category from this past year, correct?
Correct.
So, you know, maybe one way to get around what you're saying, Director Schwartz, is that if we run into these issues, and I think staff gave us a pretty good explanation earlier about why we ran into that issue. There was just a lot of applications, and I'm sure everybody learned a lot. I know I did from this morning / this afternoon. We can be flexible with that general fund money if it becomes something that we really feel passionately about funding. Am I right with that?
You are right, and that's the nice thing that I think that we see with that general fund appropriation is that it does provide some more flexibility. And I think maybe, you know, we sort of unwittingly did ourselves a disservice by recommending that the board allocate that funding across 4 categories. So lots of lessons to be learned in all of this.
I wonder if it would be appropriate, recognizing the value that we all clearly place on education, and it would probably be useful to do some homework and see, but I'm pretty sure we've spent all that, or almost all of the education money the last few years. but maybe someone can pull that quickly.
We have that data. I don't have it off the top of my head, unless I don't want to put Ben Wade on the spot, poor guy. But I do believe that we've spent that down nearly every year, but I don't think we saw the demand that we saw this round. And I think that's another kind of lesson that we've learned in all of this, is that past behavior doesn't necessarily predict the applications that we're going to get in this grant program for whatever reason, and we have some hypotheses. But you know, in the past couple of years, we saw quite a high demand on the environment and recreation bucket, and at least for this round, we did not see that again. And so, you know, it's kind of hard to look in our crystal ball and kind of match up the funding available with the exact need coming in the door, but we do the best that we can.
Yeah, I think that's just, I mean, having worked in those types of organizations, it takes about 6 months to plan. So it kind of just depends on that role of when people are going to show up. But I would suggest maybe we consider, or at least discuss, ramping up our education fund to $750,000, adding another $250 to it. Maybe not going gangbusters and bumping it to a full $1 million, but giving it a little padding. It'd be interesting to see if others agree.
We can do that, and also I just want to emphasize again that the general fund that we have available, so after this board approval that we heard this morning / afternoon, we'll have about $5.5 million left of the general fund on top of the construction fund appropriation from last year as well. So we can of course put more funding from the construction fund in this category. We can also prioritize this funding bucket for general fund supplements in the next 2 years.
So it sounds like you're recommending we hold the categories at these levels, and then we recognize that we have that built-in cushion. And I think Director Mitchell wants to.
I would agree with that, Director Dutton. I also wanted to reiterate something that we've been really focused on and working on, so that we can accurately predict potential needs as close as possible. But through our Basin Roundtable process, through all of our outreach, through our next go around with the basin implementation plans, through the project costing tool, what we are trying to do is really be able to have better predictions of when projects are going to be coming in, when they'll be coming in for funding, and make our recommendations to you based on that. And so when staff is out there and asking what projects, basins you have coming up, and when do you see those happening, that is the purpose of that. So we can make accurate predictions to the board for recommendations to those funding buckets.
Great. Director Yon.
So Lauren, with the money that comes in from DD, are there any strings attached to where that goes, or will there be, or could there be by the legislature?
So the funding that will come in from DD is directed to the Water Plan Grant Program, specifically in statute now, or to compact compliance efforts. And the allocation between those is not specified, and it's also not specified which categories that funding would have to go into for the Water Plan Grant Program. It would follow a similar process that we're doing right now. We would anticipate making that appropriation through the projects bill. And so this board would provide their recommendation, and then it would also have to be appropriated through the legislature. Not to be too budget geeky about it, but the way DD works is that it authorizes the transfer of funding into a newly developed water plan cash fund. It doesn't provide the appropriation, which actually gives us the spending authority to award grants. So we have to go through that process.
Okay. But it makes sense to me, looking at this today, that we would do staff recommendation, because we have quite a bit of flexibility, and so it would make sense that we would do this. Because you never, just like we were talking about, you never know what's going to come in when, and we just happened to get 2 really large education and outreach grants this time, so we just never know when that might happen. And so, you know, I think this is appropriate at this time, and then we can adjust it in January or whenever we need to.
Director Schwartz.
Quick question, the balance in the Environmental and Recreation Fund, does that roll over? If we don't, those grants don't go out the door?
Yes,
So
It
that- do all the funds roll over, or just some specific
All of the construction fund monies in those buckets will roll over. We do have the requirement that we have to expend the general fund. So we have that available until we don't.
And DD's revenue is exempt from Tabor?
I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody know the answer to that question?
Amy?
I don't know the answer.
I don't believe it is, and it will still, like Lauren said, it still has to go through an appropriation process, and so those time limits would happen if there were one to be put on the appropriation clause when it would be appropriated through the legislature.
Okay. Cool. Director Anderson?
If I'm following this question right, there won't be any funds from Proposition DD for the fiscal year 2021. The first time those funds would be available would be 21, 22.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional questions, or should we move to staff recommendation? Let's have it, Lauren.
Oh. Staff recommendation is that the board approve the 12.25 million water plan implementation funding plan for inclusion in the 2020 projects bill.
Great. Director Brown.
I'd like to move staff recommendation on item 12C for the non-reimbursable project investment water plan implementation funding at 12.25 million for fiscal year 2021.
It's been moved by Director Brown and seconded by Director Trick to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12C. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, all of our Arkansas Valley folks who've been so patient all day, it's finally time. We're at agenda item 12D.
Good afternoon. Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. Last item of a very long day, I'm sure. It's unfortunate we're not preparing to put boots on and go out and pick potatoes out of a farm. There's something about looking forward to putting boots on and getting out in the dirt. Last item of the day is the Arkansas Valley Conduit request for a funding package of $100 million. What I wanted to talk briefly about, in the packet, I added 2 additional items that were not in there initially. So I'd like to walk through what all is in this particular board memo as attachments. Obviously, the board memo is followed by a data sheet, the Ark Valley Conduit handout that is traditionally used in presentations by the district, the congressional support letter, a 2019 SB 19001 is a joint memorial by the Senate in regards to the support for the Ark Valley Conduit. And that was an additional item added, and also a letter from Senator Crowder to the governor requesting support for this project. And then also in there, as was originally in there, is the Governor Polis's support for the project. And in addition, I didn't want to repeat a lot of the information that was in the original approval in 2006, so I added just the work that was done back in 2006. A little bit of history for those that are new to the board. We brought a loan request from the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District Enterprise Fund to the board for a $60 million authorization. And a reminder, all loans over $10 million require legislative approval. That went through, and it had a limit on it of 2 years. We wanted to know what the district planned at the time. $60 million, and it's still a lot of money, but $60 million kind of pushed us to the edge of what we had available. 2 years later, not a lot had progressed, and so the district requested we add 10 years. and we did so in a subsequent subsequent projects bill. That date has passed, and the district has made considerable progress. And in my opinion, obviously those that are waiting for clean water in the Arkansas Valley, this is not moving anywhere near fast enough. But I've been fortunate enough to work with the district over the last 10 years, and there's some momentum, and it's exciting, and I really feel this is a good opportunity for this board to be involved in that. Background on the project in general sense. On the screen you can see the red line that brings water from Pueblo Dam all the way out to Lamar, and a couple legs off of that. It's a total of 130 miles, approximately 30-inch pipeline. Also a reminder, the $60 million loan that was authorized back in '06 was, part of it was used for the hydropower plant that was, we just cut the ribbon on. It's named the James Broderick Hydropower Plant. And it took up 20 million of that 60, so that left 40 million available that expired. And that was the indication I gave you in the financial cash management report I gave earlier. Of note, the price of the entire project, that red line, has in essence doubled from 300 million to 600 million over the course of the last 16 years. In talking to their executive director, Jim Broderick, I said, that seems like a significant increase, and there's some indication that maybe that's inflated due to some uncertainty yet in how those are estimated. I know that there are many involved in this project that do not anticipate this being a $600 million project, but about the time you say that, surprise. So the current estimate is $600 million. Their request to the board was a grant loan package up to $100 million, of which 20 they were requesting for non-reimbursable funding. We did not have that much non-reimbursable money available based on that calculation I mentioned earlier to maintain a fund that can stay up with inflation, for construction inflation. But we were able to get that down to $10 million. And so the recommendation that we have in front of the board is a package to go in the projects bill of $100 million, of which 90 is loan and 10 million is grant. One caveat, and I'm going to let the district come up and speak. They've brought a few folks that obviously have been working very tirelessly on this project. The recommendation is to get it in the projects bill as such, so it'll be appropriated at $10 million non-reimbursable, and the $90 million loan, we need that authorization in the bill. The district will be required to come back to a future board and identify exactly how those, how the loan will be repaid, how the collateral is set up, and all the rates and all those things that we typically go through in the review of a loan. And also I've requested that they must return and talk to us about how the distribution of that 10 million will occur and how it lines up with the federal match that needs to come in for the project to move forward. So with that, I am going to turn this over to a stranger to the board, Mr. Alan Hamill. Oh, we were going to run this video first.
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Mr. Hamill. If you could please introduce yourself.
Yes. I can now say good evening. For the record, I'm Alan Hamill. I'm on the board of the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District, and I can probably say I've served 4 terms, or I guess it's 3 2/3 terms on this board. And sitting there, did some reminiscing and brought back a lot of great memories and all the hard work that this board does and their outstanding staff. And went through some exciting times in the mid-90s and again in 2011 to 2017. And I sit here and see one board member I served with and now a bunch of new faces. But I see Rush George's. And I served with him and actually go back to 2005 in the roundtable process. He is the godfather of the roundtable process in IBCC, and back here at the table, and it's great to see him. I'm going to give just a little introduction to you on who we plan to bring up, and it's going to be 7 people. And I know the time of day and from past experience, but we've carefully coordinated this to make it quick and brief, but we want to get to your questions. We know it's a large request, but it is a needed request. And if you think about it, 60 years have passed, and that need was there in 1962, and every year the need grows, and it affects 50,000 people and 40 communities in the lower basin below Pueblo Reservoir. So with that, following me will be Christine Arbogast. She'll go on the record, of course. And she's our lobbyist and political advisor. She'll be followed by Jim Broderick, our executive director, followed by Bill Long, our president, who's been president, it should be noted, for 13 years. And he's been working on this project for 17 years, and I'll come back to that just a little because it has a little history. But to start it off, we thought a short video from 1962 might just get us into the thought of the importance of the Arkansas, or the Arkansas project, river project, but also the Arkansas River Conduit. So thank you. And I'll be right back.
I just wanted to make one comment about the time of day and where we're at in the agenda. This is a big deal, and you guys came a long way, so feel free to take the time that you deserve.
We will. We'll still try to be brief. But Madam Chair, if you tell me I have all the time you want, I might get on my soapbox.
President or member of the House and Senate than to fly as we have flown today over some of the bleakest land in the United States, and then to come to a river and see what grows next to it, and come to this city and come to this town and come to this platform and know how vitally important water is. To many members of the Congress, to many Americans, the words frying pan Arkansas must of necessity be a name which is taken on faith. But when they come here to this state and see how vitally important it is, not just to this state, but to the West, to the United States, then they realize how important it is that all the people of the country support this project which belongs to all the people of the country. So I'm glad to be here today. I hope that those of us who hold positions of public responsibility in 1962 are as far-seeing about the needs of this country in 1982 and 1992 as those men and women were 30 years ago who began to make this project possible. The world may have been built in 7 days, but this project was built in 30 years. And it took labor day in and day out, week in and week out, month in, month out, year in and year out, by congressmen and senators and citizens and the press of this state to make this project possible. And it will be some years before its full benefits are made available to all of you. What are we going to do in 1962, beginning today, to determine what projects we should develop so that by the end of this century, when there are 300 million people in the United States, that there will be available to them land and water and light and power and resources and places to live, and places to rest, and places to work. So we salute this project today, and we salute those who made it possible. And we look to the future, and we look to the past. And we commit ourselves in 1962, not only to celebrate this project, but to move ahead in all the other areas, stretching from California to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in building this country up.
That was when the Frying Pan, Arkansas project was authorized and signed into law. Of course, the project itself had to still be built. A little trivia, I was already 2 years into working in water as a part-time type person. And I got to see the motorcade pass down Abriendo with the president in it. And I started to learn a little bit about water, but over this last 60 years, I got to learn a lot more and work with great people. The Arkansas Valley Conduit is really the last significant part of the Frying Pan, Arkansas project that hasn't been built. There's a few other conditional water rights and wilderness and areas and that, but this is the last significant piece. And the citizens in the lower basin who've been paying their taxes and that haven't benefited. And the water quality back then justified building that pipeline, and that water quality has deteriorated. And you'll hear more about that and the challenges it gives. But this is a critical project to our basin and the lower district, and we're appreciating your consideration today. One other side note, there have now been 4 pipelines connected to municipal outlet. One was originally authorized, that are now taking the high quality water out of Pueblo Reservoir and serving Pueblo, Pueblo West, Colorado Springs, Security, Fountain, and Widefield. So they've gotten advantage of getting that high quality water, and now it's time to get it to the lower basin, and we need your help. In 2001, we began again to work to get this project built, and now another 18 years have passed. But there are, as you'll hear, some exciting things and opportunity, and things have happened. It's in your packet. A lot of design, preliminary design, environmental work that was needed is done. Kurt gave you a good background on the tie of CWCB to this project, and want to thank the CWCB staff and boards of the past for keeping this alive, and of course you have that opportunity today, and take this opportunity to thank Becky and Kirk and their great staffs for all the hard work they've done, and our current basin representative, Jack Goebel, who helps in a lot of arenas in our basin doing great work. I think, as Kirk mentioned, the cost have doubled, so our ask has gone up, but it didn't double. But it's important dollars, and Christine's going to touch on that, why it's important back in Washington, D.C. I think it's important to make the tie to the Colorado Water Plan and the Arkansas Basin Roundtable Implementation Plan. You're all familiar with the water plan. Had the honor to be serving when this historic plan was adopted for Colorado. And I remember the board, 2015, or was it January of 2016? We presented it in December, I think. said that every action that this board takes from this day forward, and I'm looking at Becky, who was coordinating getting the water plan designed and built with a lot of help from a lot of agencies and a lot of people, and that we should tie that to the water plan. And this project is tied to the Arkansas Basin Roundtable Implementation Plan, which is integrated into the Colorado Water Plan, and it's top of the request in the Arkansas Basin. So it has that support throughout our basin. Just in closing, earlier in last session, there was a joint Senate-House memorial that they passed unanimously to request of Congress and the President that they begin to refund the Arkansas Basin conduit. It's gone through a rough year or two on funding. So this will greatly kind of add emphasis to our work in Washington. With that, I'll ask Christine Arbogast to come up. And thank you for this opportunity and the memories.
I'm going to add one more item to your packet. Thanks for having us here. I'm Christine Arbogast with Kagosic and Associates, and I have had the honor of representing the Southeastern District since 2000. And we've been working on this project since about that time. I'm honored also to be here and watch the incredible work that you guys do that's so important to the state. I'm a native of Pueblo, and in 1962, when President Kennedy came to Pueblo, I was 9 years old. And I stood on the sidewalk of 4th Street, which leads to Abriendo that Alan referenced, and watched President Kennedy's motorcade move through town with my dad. I didn't know anything about water then, but I knew that a president coming to my hometown was a pretty big deal. And now, a half a century later, we, from the Lower Arkansas Basin, come to you for your help to complete the project that President Kennedy deemed so important that he traveled to Pueblo. So on page 4 of your materials, you'll find a more detailed explanation of why the participants of the Arkansas Valley Conduit are here today. And we're seeking your financial partnership in trying to get this project under construction. I realize that partnering on a Bureau of Reclamation project financially is not something that this board does on a routine basis, and that our ask is large, but it is hugely important. There's really just 3 phrases that are at the crux of why we are here. And those phrases are subject to appropriation, earmark ban, and the Office of Management and Budget. The Arkansas Valley Conduit, as Alan said, was in the original FRIARC authorizing legislation. It was reauthorized, if you will, in 2009, and that legislation provided a funding mechanism to repay the cost of the entire project over time. But that legislation also included the phrase subject to appropriation. In other words, Congress had to provide the funds to build the conduit to be repaid later. In 2012, the rules of Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate created an earmark ban. The net effect of that action was to leave funding decisions to the federal agencies, with no room for congressional change to the administration's budget line items. And those agencies, like the Bureau of Reclamation, who is our partner on this project, are dependent on support for their budget recommendations from the Office of Management and Budget. If OMB does not support inclusion of a funding request from Reclamation, the budget submitted to Congress will include no line item for a specific project. And our delegation has no tools to change that in the era of an earmark ban. That has been, and so we've been zeroed out of the administration's budget for the last 2 years. And the letter that, so you have a letter in your packet from the 2 senators and Congressman Buck and Tipton, who represent the area that the conduit would serve. And the letter that I just passed out is from all 7 members of our House delegation. You'll note in that letter that I just passed out, there is no reference to the Arkansas Valley conduit. All they can do with an earmark ban is ask that the general funding category be increased, and that the directive that the Senate committee gave to the Bureau of Reclamation on priorities for spending that money be approved by the House. They can't mention the Arkansas Valley conduit because of the earmark ban. So OMB and the administration have made it abundantly clear that without a direct contribution from non-federal sources, this project is unlikely to move forward. It's clearly exasperating to project participants who will tell you the challenges they face without this safe drinking water supply. We have with us 3 folks who are directly involved in dealing, one with the water quality issue and 2 with the waste issue, and their stories are compelling. We are really, really grateful for the bipartisan support we have from the congressional delegation. And the same is also true for the state legislators who represent the lower Arkansas Valley. In fact, no one opposes this project. Financial commitments, many other rural water projects in the West, Fort Peck, Garrison in North Dakota, those states have contributed millions and millions of dollars in order to see federal appropriations flow to them. And that is what we're asking of the state of Colorado to do for us, but primarily through a loan. So funding for rural water projects is totally discretionary. And the only mandatory spending that there is for such projects occurs in the case of negotiated and fully adjudicated Indian water rights settlements. So there's no way for us to get in that mandatory spending category. We cannot federally legislate our way out of this problem, and that is why we need your help. So we thank you for the board's longstanding support for the conduit, for your thoughtful consideration for our request, so that no one in Colorado is forced to drink unsafe drinking water. Thanks very much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on this geeky federal budget stuff. Sorry. I'd like to introduce, Jim Broderick has yielded his time in the interest of your time to Bill Long, who's the president of the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District and has been a true leader on this project for the lower Arkansas Valley.
Good afternoon. Bill Long, president of the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District. And I want to begin by thanking all of you for the past support of the board and as well as your consideration for today's application. And also want to recognize Kirk and his staff. They're always the ultimate professionals to work with, and thank you for your time. Sitting here this afternoon, I can see that's true dedication, so thank you. The people of Southern Colorado truly have waited 60 years for the Arkansas Valley conduit. As noted previously, the water quality has continued to get worse, while water quality standards have gotten worse as well. And I guess maybe you should say better. I'm not quite certain, but they're difficult to meet. As noted earlier, I've been on the board for 17 years, the president for 13 years, worked on this project for 17 of those years. I can promise you, working with our team, the Bureau of Reclamation, that we have looked at every single option multiple times. We have in fact been able to cut the cost back from $600 million to $500 million, which includes a 42% contingency. So we're hopefully there's additional cost savings. But it is a project we need your help with. The only way that we can move forward in the Arkansas Valley is to have safe drinking water for our residents. The only way we can move forward is to have the Arkansas Valley conduit and a fresh water supply. We can treat our water to drinking water standards today, but then we create a waste stream that creates a new problem. So the solution is a new water supply. We brought along 3 of our operators from the lower Arkansas Valley. I'll introduce all 3 of them, and then they'll introduce themselves when they come up. They'll be brief as well. We are very respectful of your time, but we have Rick Jones from the May Valley Water District, and Rick's the system manager. Norman Noy from the South Swink Water District, he's a system manager, and the executive director of the Lahana Municipal Water and Wastewater Utility. So they just will briefly share with you the challenges they're faced with in the future, as well as the challenges they face today. So thank you. And then I'll close things out.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Jones from May Valley Water, and I thank you for your time. And I brought a box of engineering reports we've done over the years, time and time again. And they all really lead to the conduit. I mean, we can treat the water, but as they said, we're going to create other problems doing it. We've operated under an enforcement order since 2002 from the State Health Department, on us to get something figured out. And some of those solutions are going to drive our customers' bills up, and increase them by $200 a month. And, that's not feasible. The only economically feasible idea is the conduit. And now that the EPA has kind of drawn the line in the sand with a real hard 2025 deadline, that's the way we've got to go, because Plan B is not good. And we just desire to have the clean drinking water down there for our people. We get complaints all the time. We're not supposed to drink the water, and that's a little disheartening. So anyway, I thank you for consideration.
Hi, my name is Norman Noy, and I actually was a part of the first group back in 2006 that came to talk to you people on our first loan. Also had the unfortunate distinction of being the operator of 2 of the first 5 water systems that were issued enforcement order in 1999. And I can tell you from experience, this has been a long, drawn out mess. Water systems of the lower Arkansas Valley not only have the current enforcement orders that Rick touched on slightly, and those orders, we got strict timelines that we got to meet. Our enforcement orders have been amended for the 4th time in January of last year. And with that amendment, we have to show significant progress on this conduit, because that's what we're using for our compliance, is the conduit. We have to show significant progress by the end of 2022, or we got to start seeking other alternatives. And I can tell you from an experience of 20 years doing this, there's not another alternative. I'm going to just touch on just a little bit. We have our drinking water side that we're under enforcement under, but unfortunately, we also have waste disposal issues within our current systems. And the way that's taking place is iron has an affinity for radium. And none of us are treating for radionuclides right now. Let me make that very clear. But through our iron filtration systems, our media is containing radionuclide waste, our backwash water, and the iron sludge in our treatment tanks are containing elevated levels of T-norms. And T-norms is an acronym for technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive materials. And tests have proven this out. In 2014, South Swink Water received a notice from CDPHE that we had 60 days to apply for discharge permits of backwash water, and we had to comply with industrial waste impoundment regulations to deal with these T norms that we were producing inadvertently. I started this process and ran into complications. The Haz Waste Division did not know how they could issue a permit for a radionuclide waste stream. And of course the waste impoundment just escalated that. Cost would be way above what we could afford to do. Therefore, CDPHE at that time kind of backed off on the waste issue of iron filtration systems. However, in 2018, the state legislature passed a bill that gives CDPHE the authority to adopt rules for safe management of T norms. A draft report was released late this summer, 623 pages long. The final report is due to the state legislature by the end of this year, and this ruling on T norms will be adopted by the end of next year. I don't know exactly how yet that this is going to affect us, but I know it's going to affect us because we're producing T norms. And so we got a twofold deal. We got the problem on our drinking water side, we got the problem on our waste side that inadvertently we are producing and not even treating for radionuclides. And I can just give you just a brief deal because we've already had to dispose of some of our iron filtration media, and our system serves about 260 taps. We had to dispose of 4 tons of filter media. We got a bid from a contractor in Denver to dispose of that media. It was $13,000. We did it ourselves through a lot of paperwork and a lot of time, and that came up to about half of that, but it's still for 260 people, and that small amount of waste came to that sum of money. In closing, we have one option, and thank you for your help and your time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Chair, thank you for your time. I'd like to start by quickly echoing President Kennedy when he was talking about flying over some of the bleakest land in the United States. Back in the 1960s, there was an author whose name currently escapes me. She stopped in La Junta writing a book about the Santa Fe Trail. And she said about La Junta that she had never been any place that had more streams with less water, more cows with less milk, there where you could look farther and see less than any other place in the world. It's a place I call home. Might not be a great advertisement for tourism, but it's a wonderful place to sell cows. But that brings us back to one of the things she said, is that there are more streams with less water. Water quality is our biggest issue. For time considerations only, I'm going to focus specifically on Otero County, which is where La Junta is at. There are 24 public water systems in the county. Of those 24, 15 of them are currently reporting violations with combined radium. Of those, 11 of them have current enforcement actions against them. Out of that 24, 4 systems connected to the city of Junta to get their drinking water is the only means to get a potable water supply. They financially could not treat their water. It was never going to be in their plan. Of those 4, one of them is only purchasing about 50% of their drinking water from La Junta. The rest they're blending in with their raw well water. This last year, they also wound up having a radionuclide violation because their source water is not improving. It only goes one direction. Historically, that's the way it is. Out of the numbers that I just gave you, last year I gave a similar report, and as of their consumer confidence reports of 2018, that's 2 more public water systems now have issues with combined radium. So we speak about the city of La Junta, and like Mr. Noe just told us, the water gets us coming and going. The city of La Junta does have a good water source. We have a reverse osmosis treatment. We're able to take care and handle any type of contaminant to keep us going for any of the foreseeable future. We built recently an almost $19 million wastewater treatment plant. That's quite a financial burden for a community that serves about 8,200 people. This was in an effort to stay in compliance on our wastewater side. But as we're talking about source water, the one thing that we can't quite shake yet is selenium. Along with all the radionuclides, selenium is naturally occurring in high volumes all throughout the lower Arkansas Valley. So with the workings of our new treatment plant, we hope that some of the processes that have put into place will treat that, but it will not bring us all the way down into compliance. The only way that, or at least the most affordable method, outside of spending multi-million dollars on our own, for example, there was recently a small design that could treat upwards of 2 million gallons of water per day that would wholly remove selenium. Well, that's fantastic at that price for that much water, but our treatment plant can produce 6.6 million gallons of water per day. So you're looking minimum 3 times the expense to be able to put that process into place. However, if the conduit is passed and built, not only do you solve the problems for the city of La Junta and the consecutive systems attached to us, you will find a way to have solved the problems for the remaining 15 water systems in Otero County alone, not to mention the others that I just don't have time to speak of today. Thank you very much for your time.
So thank you again for your time. We're more than happy to try to answer questions. Jim Broderick, who chose to yield his time to me, can answer the more technical questions if you have those types of questions. So I'll yield the floor to the Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bill. Are there any, or excuse me, Jim.
Bill.
Nope, Bill.
You're right.
I had it.
It's a long day.
I'm trying to get all 7 of you guys. All right, are there any questions for any of the Arkansas Valley folks? Director Schwartz.
Thank you. I did notice when the bill was originally passed for the funding that it had an extended expiration date, and I wanted to know if that is under consideration for this action.
The original $60 million that was in the bill has expired, and so this is.
I know, are we going to
No.
create an extended expiration date on this?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Next.
adding that to the bill for this 100 million? I don't know that we've considered that yet, but I that would be wise, yes.
Yeah,
I would imagine we would need to find
I
a.
have to do this every year.
Yeah.
Director Brown?
With the approval today, will you come back before us when the district comes with their grant NRI? Will we approve this again, or is this the final approval, since we haven't seen their disbursement plan?
So the recommendation is to put this in the projects bill as a package that will take it out of circulation for us to use it for other purposes. And the recommendation is to condition that approval for the district to return to this board to identify how the distribution of that 10 million will occur, and also how they would repay the $90 million loan.
Thanks, I just wanted to clarify that.
Director Goebel?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And I appreciate you all for making the trip. Very important project. If it makes you feel any better, I just saw that the U.S. Senate hearings are still going on, and they started 2 hours before us, so maybe. And JFK is pretty entertaining, let me tell you. I think I was getting chills, but I'm not sure it competes with impeachment hearings. But anyway, just a few comments. So poor water quality has been an issue in this area of the state even before Colorado existed. I'm kind of interested in local history, and you look at journal entries from explorers traveling through the valley in the early 1800s, and they commented on the terrible water taste and quality at that time. So, you know, this project's been a long time in the making, and our more recent predecessors, including President Kennedy, recognized this over 60 years ago, the need to provide clean drinking water to Southeast Colorado. And as you heard today, the lack of this clean drinking water still exists today. You know, you take a drive down Highway 50 and you pass dozens of water filling stations and with at least one in almost every town. And there's a reason. And, you know, just some of my experience, you know, I think it's pretty telling of the problem. When you can still today tell where certain people grew up just by the permanent stains on their teeth due to the excess fluoride in the water that they drank when they were young. I mean, it's, you know, it's a real problem. And I'll also note quickly that the Arkansas River through this area is on the EPA's Section 303D impairment list for a list of pollutants including arsenic, manganese, iron, selenium, sulfate, and uranium. And I thought it was pretty interesting. Director Swartz pointed out she grabbed a conference agenda from about 3 doors down the hallway here for the groundwater. Yeah, Colorado Groundwater Conference. And there's a gentleman from the Colorado Geological Survey talking about the uranium problem in the Arkansas River. And so obviously it's a real problem. And although this is a pretty significant ask, I also think it's appropriate to note that the grant portion of this package represents less than 2% of the overall project estimated cost for the project. And to Kirk's earlier point, a $90 million loan is a good investment for the CWCB. You know, it's pretty significant. And lastly, I just have to note the significant time and effort that Southeastern and all the water treatment entities and water providers in the southeast part of the state have put into finding efficiencies and cost savings to make this project a reality. It's expensive, but they didn't go into it a whole lot. I think Al mentioned it a little bit, but their agreement with Pueblo Water to use their water treatment water distribution systems to get to the east side of Pueblo has saved an estimated 10 years of project time and well over $100 million in project costs. So, I mean, that right there is huge. And I could go on, and I know it's late, but with that, I would encourage the board to support this very important project.
Is that a motion? Let's do a staff recommendation.
One of the, as we're wrapping this up, Mr. Jones had this box that he said was engineering studies. I was hoping he was going to open that up and had a glass of water from the valley and offered the radionuclide taste test to the board to see if that would help. I would be happy to make the staff recommendation at this time, Madam Chair, if that's appropriate. The staff is recommending a funding package of $100 million and asking the board to include it in the 2020 projects bill for consideration by the projects bill sponsors. The funding package includes a $90 million loan and a $10 million non-reimbursable investment to the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District, acting through its water activity enterprise for costs related to the Arkansas Valley conduit from the severance tax perpetual base fund, conditioned that the district will return to the board subsequent to a successful projects bill approval to present how the $90 million loan will be secured and paid back, along with $10 million, the grant for $10 million that will be distributed, and a lot of that is based on the federal appropriations at the same time. So that's the recommendation.
Thank you, Kirk. Director Schwartz.
And again, we talked about an extended expiration date. And what time frame are we talking about? And the grant dollars would only be dispersed based upon the federal funding approval?
Yeah, those are some details I'm not sure we need to include in the projects bill, but I certainly, when we come back in January, let us get a shot at some of those details on termination of that appropriation.
Great. Director Goebel?
Thanks, Madam Chair. And with that, I would be very happy to recommend or move to approve staff recommendation of agenda item 12D.
It's been moved by Director Goebel and seconded by Director Yon to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12D. Director Hawkins.
I know it's late, but I wanted to share with all of you who sat through our meeting today that my rural water system had a pretty insignificant EPA violation when I was pregnant, and I about lost my mind worrying about my child. So to all of your families and mothers, just wanted to extend that I hear what you're saying, and I know what it's like to have a panic with a little violation. So I hope that you can take that back to all your families.
Director Mitchell?
I've now cried twice during this meeting. In my private consulting career prior to coming to the state, I worked a significant amount of time in the lower Arkansas Valley, and I'm somewhat ashamed to mention this, but I would fill my water bottles before I would go down when I knew I'd be there for a few days. And so we hear you, and the JFK video was, it always moves me to watch him speak, but I thought of another quote by JFK, and I wrote it down to make sure I would get it right. But he said, "There are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction." And I think that's the case that we're in now.
I'm an empathetic crier, so I need to give myself a few seconds here. This morning, we were under a different context. Director George was discussing equity and what equity is. And this is it. I think it's the responsibility of government and of us on this board to make sure that all Coloradans have the basic right of clean drinking water. So thank you for coming. Okay. Any other emotional comments? With that, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Well, I have a little dust in my eye too, but this is very important to us, so thank you very, very much. I was hopeful it would be approved, but to see your emotions adds to the approval a great deal, so thank you.
Okay. Okay, everyone, we have made it. We are in recess, and we will come back tomorrow morning at 8:30 for another round of fun. So have a great evening, and we'll see you in the morning.